Jessica Gorell, Your Honor, Gorrell.
And together we represent the Northern District of New York.
Okay. And for the defense.
Good morning, Your Honor. My name is Thomas Wood, and along with my co-counsel,
Victoria Rosling.
we represent the defendant in this case, Alex Franklin.
All right. Are there any preliminary motions before we begin the trial?
Yes, Your Honor. By brief way of background, however, this is a criminal case regarding the bombing of the New York Central Reserve Bank. The defendant in this case has been charged with conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction, conspiracy to destroy government property, use of a weapon of mass destruction, and destruction of government property.
All
The
right.
prosecution has two motions that we would like to provide. First is a motion for a judgment on the pleadings.
Okay.
We have been advised that the defense plans to raise the affirmative defense of Stockholm Syndrome. However, we ask that the word Stockholm Syndrome is not used during today's proceedings because it is a colloquial term that is not recognized by the American Psychiatric Association or the DSM. However, the term trauma bonding is used by both of those sources. We request that that is used instead of Stockholm Syndrome.
So are you asking for a judgment on the pleadings of eliminating their affirmative defense, or just asking that we not mention those words?
That we not mention the words Stockholm Syndrome.
Okay. What do you have to say about that?
If I may respond briefly, Your Honor, as Attorney Farrell said, the word Stockholm Syndrome is not in the American Psychological Association's DSM, which is their diagnostic material.
Mm-hmm.
However, trauma bonding is. Now, we expect evidence to be presented today that while the phrase trauma bonding is recognized, a majority of psychologists do recognize that Stockholm Syndrome is a real-life disorder. In fact, we expect to present evidence today that even the prosecution's own expert believes Stockholm Syndrome by name is real. Now, with respect to counsel's particular argument that we should substitute the word Stockholm Syndrome for trauma bonding, there doesn't seem to be any argument the counsel has for why it would be unfairly prejudicial or misleading to characterize it as Stockholm Syndrome when they're both synonyms. They're both interchangeable terms, and a majority of psychologists recognize Stockholm Syndrome as a real-life disease. It's more than sufficient for a jury to hear it. So for that reason, we ask you to deny.
Well, let me ask you, is there a difference between trauma bonding and Stockholm Syndrome?
No, Your Honor. They are interchangeable based on the evidence we expect to be presented today.
Then why does the American Psychiatric Organization, or whatever was referred to before, not recognize one but does recognize the other?
Well, there are arguments between different psychologists. Some argue that Stockholm Syndrome by name is distinguishable, and others believe that they are indistinguishable, a majority to be specific. So there's arguments between the different experts in this field as to whether they are the same, whether they are different, and whether or not they should be one should be recognized over the other.
Will there be a suggestion in today's trial that they are, in fact, the same?
Yes, Your Honor. There will be a suggestion. We expect that there will be several learned treatises that will be presented in this case, and portions of them will be read to the jury, which discuss the fact that trauma bonding and Stockholm Syndrome are synonyms, at least in the perspective of most psychologists.
And what's the probative value of using the word Stockholm Syndrome versus trauma bonding? Is that the word?
Trauma bonding, yes, Your Honor. So the probative value of using the phrase Stockholm Syndrome is that it is, among a majority of psychologists, a recognized psychological term. And if counsel wants to censor certain words versus others, I think she should have a probative value for why that would be admissible. And that's why it's probative in this case. Stockholm Syndrome has a recognized connotation and acceptance among not only academic scholars, but also in courts. In fact, these exact defenses of Stockholm Syndrome have been presented in cases like the Patty Hearst trial. So it is both well known as well as something that is a recognized phenomenon among a majority of psychologists.
Anything else from the prosecution?
Yes, Your Honor, we would quickly add that the term Stockholm Syndrome does have cultural associations, and therefore to protect the integrity of the testimony today, we do not want the term Stockholm Syndrome to be used because it could be unfairly prejudicial or slightly probative or the probative value would be that it could slightly prejudice the jury because they are bringing in outside cultural associations and not listening to the merits of the witness testimony. Therefore, we move for a judgment that the term Stockholm Syndrome
How
is
does
not
that
used.
prejudicial effect substantially outweigh the probative value?
The potential for the jury to hear the term Stockholm Syndrome and bring in their own connotations for what that would mean or for the merits of the witness's testimony could possibly sway the jury in one way or another. However, the term trauma bonding is not culturally used, and therefore it would preserve the integrity of the witness testimony.
Well, I mean, jurors are allowed to bring in their own life experiences and common sense in evaluating a case, aren't they?
Absolutely, Your Honor. However, we would like the jury to focus more on the substance of what our expert witnesses are testifying to and not be distracted by culturally pervasive terms that are associated with pop culture cases such as the Patty Hearst trial.
Would would the concept of Stockholm Syndrome be something that a lay person would be capable of having knowledge about?
We believe that given the substance of what the witnesses will be testifying to today, it will be entirely possible for the jury to understand trauma bonding even without the use of the word Stockholm Syndrome.
So that wasn't my question. My question was, would a layperson be able to understand what Stockholm Syndrome is without expert testimony?
Yes.
Well, then, I mean, they should then, as a normal people in the jury, be able to bring in their understandings of that, right? I mean, if the answer is no, that somebody would not understand Stockholm Syndrome without expert testimony, then of course any biases they bring in about it would be inappropriate. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Either way, I'm going to deny the motion. All right.
Your Honor, we do have,
Wait, hold on, she had two, so go on.
Your Honor, we also move to enter Exhibit 10 into evidence. We believe that this could raise a possible objection on the grounds of hearsay.
What is Exhibit 10?
Exhibit 10 is a manifesto written by a co-conspirator named Baylor Riswald, which Your Honor would like a copy.
I have one.
We believe that there are grounds of hearsay. However, this document would fall into the hearsay exception 804B2 because it is a statement of a co-conspirator. It goes
Okay.
toward that.
So why would you want to exclude something that you already recognize as an exception?
We move that it be submitted.
Oh, you offering to admit it.
Offering to admit it, yes.
I see. Okay. Counsel, what do you have to say about that?
we have no objections to the admission.
So it will be submitted. Well, you can submit it once the prosecution's case in chief begins. All right. Anything from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor, we do have one pretrial motion. We asked to exclude what is pre-marked as Exhibit 6. Exhibit 6 is an affidavit from a bank teller named Wimberly Taylor that's addressed to an FBI agent named Dr. Reagan Lewis. The document contains not only hearsay statements, but hearsay within hearsay, which should be excluded for that reason.
Have you discussed which portions of that document you believe are hearsay with opposing counsel?
I am not, Your Honor. I would say that the hearsay within hearsay that would apply here are statements that are by Alex Franklin that are being quoted by Wimberly Taylor. And under the rules of evidence, both of the components of the hearsay must fall under some sort of an exception in order for it to be admissible. So
Alex Franklin is the defendant?
Alex Franklin is the defendant in this case, but Wimberly Taylor will not be testifying today. So her statement, because she's not testifying, would be hearsay.
Counselor, what do you have to say about the hearsay with the affidavit itself?
Your Honor, we have no intention to try and use Exhibit 6, so we have no objections on the grounds of hearsay.
Let's assume for a moment that you would offer that as evidence. What would your argument be?
Your Honor, this statement was made on May 23rd, 2019, which was also the day of the bombing. Therefore, this could fall under the hearsay exception of present sense impression.
Okay. What would you say about the hearsay within hearsay, the supposed statements of Alex Franklin?
They are opinions about the defendant that were made on the same day of.
Well, let me ask you something. You're the prosecution, right? And who are the statements by?
Statements are by someone speaking about the party opponent.
Are they speaking about them, or are they statements of the party opponent?
Statements of the party opponent, Your Honor.
Okay.
Which? Then if they are statements of party opponent contained within a document that reflects a present sense impression, then two hearsay exceptions have been satisfied, and this would be admissible.
All right. So we'll work on that a little bit. I mean, if you're not offering any, of course, you won't have too much of it, but we need to challenge
Okay.
this motion. All right. So you said you had one?
Yeah, we did have,
Well,
we had
are
a
we,
small
are we
house-
putting that document in though, in
They're
our
not,
case?
but if he's gonna try to exclude it, then I want him to be prepared for what their argument is. All right.
I can see it.
Let's see. That's one. We finished it. It's allowed because it's without opposition. And we're ready for openings?
We had a small housekeeping matter, Your Honor.
So you don't have just one.
Just a housekeeping matter. It would be, we asked to be allowed to use what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 9 in opening statements. It's a series of medical records of Alex Franklin detailing certain injuries she endured while she was at the compound. I have a good faith basis to believe it will be entered evidence, so I ask to be allowed to use it in opening.
Do you need my permission if you have a good faith belief that it will be entered in evidence?
My understanding is no, Your Honor, but I wanted to give the court notice of my intention to use it in case it comes up.
Did you give them notice of that?
I did not, Your Honor.
Are you going to object to his opening if he uses that document in the opening?
No, Your Honor.
Okay, so you don't need to ask my permission.
Okay.
You just need to know if they're going to object when you do it.
Understood, Your Honor.
All right.
And with that, defense is ready to proceed.
Okay, let's hear opening statements.
Members of the jury, I suggest that you close your eyes and visualize something with me. It is May 23rd at 4 o'clock in the morning in downtown Syracuse, New York. There is a bank, and in a few hours it will be full of people just like you, with bank accounts, errands to run, and families to see at the end of the day. But right now, it is 4 o'clock in the morning. Everything is quiet and still. That's when the bomb went off. My name is Jennifer Farrell, and along with my co-counsel, Jessica Gorell, we're going to tell you about how the defendant, Alex Franklin, set off that bomb at 4 o'clock in the morning. We're going to tell you how she helped build the bomb with her co-conspirators, how she helped collect all of the materials and paid for them, and how ultimately it was all her idea. Now, the defense is going to tell you that she has something called Stockholm Syndrome, which means that she doesn't understand what she is doing in the moment. Even still, we, the prosecution, are charging Alex Franklin with 4 crimes. Conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction, conspiracy to destroy government property, use of a weapon of mass destruction, and the destruction of government property. Now, we have the burden of proving that Alex Franklin committed these crimes beyond a reasonable doubt. And we're going to prove that to you by exploring 2 points. First is that Alex Franklin helped commit this crime, with these crimes. She helped build those bombs, and she set them off. Number 2, Alex Franklin did not suffer from Stockholm Syndrome. She understood everything she was doing at every moment. To help prove these points to you, we're going to introduce you to 2 people. The first is Raphael O'Connor, the leader of an organization called the Covenant of Righteous Retribution. He will tell you about how Alex Franklin came to him and said that she wanted to destroy the bank. He will tell you how she was excited about planning this attack and how she wanted to be the one who sent the text that remotely detonated the bomb. You're also going to meet FBI agent Robert Lewin, who is a trained psychiatric specialist and was embedded in the Covenant for 6 months leading up to the attack. Officer Lewin is going to explain to you that Franklin understood everything she was doing. This whole idea that she was brainwashed to misunderstand her actions is completely unfounded. Now, at the end of the day, you are going to get a jury instruction sheet, and it will give you all of the elements that you need to find in order to convict the defendant of these 4 crimes. We're going to prove to you today that she did that. We ask that you find her guilty.
I want you to imagine what it's like to be alone. Truly alone. You have nothing good in your life. Your family is either dead or abusive. You spend your days in dark isolation chambers for days on end. You have no possessions, no friends, you have nothing. Imagine what anyone would do for some human interaction. Raphael O'Connor, the leader of the Covenant of Revolutionary Retribution cult, saw a vulnerable, abused 13-year-old girl, and he showed her the most basic acts of human kindness. And like a moth to a flame, Alex Franklin couldn't escape. You'll hear that in October of 2013, Alex was taken to the Covenant compound by her father, Ray Franklin. You'll hear that this compound was outside of, completely disconnected from anywhere outside of the world. And you'll learn that as a member of this cult, Alex Franklin and other children had to endure certain rituals designed to purify them of the evils of capitalism. You'll learn that Alex Franklin endured grueling acts of psychological abuse, like starvation, forced labor, being locked in for days in these dark isolation chambers. But most importantly, you'll hear about the beatings. You'll hear that her father, Ray Franklin, frequently beat her whenever she did something that wasn't to the Covenant's liking. You'll hear that eventually she went along with it because what else could she do? Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, my name is Thomas Wood. Along with my co-counsel, Vicki Roslin, we've been asked by Alex Franklin to talk to you about the horrific acts of abuse and psychological manipulation that she went through that converted and turned her into someone with Stockholm Syndrome. Now, you're going to hear 2 things that are going to be blatantly apparent after this full trial. Number one, you're going to learn that the prosecution witnesses that they put forward are woefully inadequate to even proving their case. But second, and most importantly, you'll learn that throughout Alex Franklin's captivity in the Covenant compound, she had a condition called Stockholm Syndrome that made her mentally incapable of knowing the difference between right and wrong. I want to start with that first thing, about the inadequacy of the witnesses you're going to hear from the prosecution. First person you're going to hear from is the cult leader named Raphael O'Connor. You're going to learn a lot of things about Mr. O'Connor. Not a particularly great guy. In fact, the prosecution's own expert witness, who you're going to hear from later on, calls him a textbook sociopath. This is someone who even the prosecution admits is a liar. He's manipulative. He even manipulated the prosecution into giving him a sweetheart plea deal that's going to keep his behind out of jail as long as he decides to make up some allegations against people like Alex Franklin, who were captives of his. I want to talk to you about that other witness you're going to hear from, Special Agent Lewin. You'll hear that Special Agent Lewin is an FBI agent who went undercover and investigated the compound. What you didn't hear from the prosecution was that Special Agent Lewin bungled this whole operation. You'll hear that Special Agent Lewin was stuck in a porta potty, locked inside of this dark makeshift isolation chamber as the bombs went off. You'll learn that Special Agent Lewin had learned of the bomb plot, had an opportunity to disclose this and prevent the bombing, and he didn't. And you'll learn that this error that he made is what's motivating him to making sure that somebody pays for this grave error that was made by the FBI. I want to talk to you about this other thing that we're going to prove in today's case, and that is Stockholm Syndrome. You'll learn that Stockholm Syndrome is a condition that captives and cult members like Alex Franklin will develop as a result of enduring physical abuse, psychological manipulation, threats, and ultimately acts of isolation and an inability to escape. I want to take all those different factors that you'll hear about one at a time, starting with the issue of threats. You'll learn that for Stockholm Syndrome to exist, there has to be threats of physical and psychological abuse at the hands of the captor. And you'll even get to see a lot of the threats that were acted upon against Alex Franklin. You'll actually see the medical records from when she was put in the hospital after the beatings from Ray Franklin. You'll learn about the sprained wrists she would endure almost weekly, the lacerations to her arm, cuts to her face, broken ribs. You'll even learn about the fact that she was even thrown through a glass window. And you'll learn that all of these acts of physical abuse were encouraged and directed upon by the prosecution's star witness, Raphael O'Connor. The second thing that you're going to learn as a factor of Stockholm Syndrome is small acts of kindness. These are the things that manipulate victims into falling in love with their captors. You'll learn that Raphael would show these small acts of kindness to Alex Franklin in order to get her on his side. Acts like giving her a secret cell phone that no one else was allowed to have. A cell phone that she could only use to reach out to Raphael O'Connor. You'll learn that he even saved her from being almost beaten to death by Ray Franklin, and it was this act, above all else, that made her view Raphael O'Connor not as just a nice guy, but as a deity, her savior. Then the third factor you'll hear about, isolation. You'll hear that the prosecution will concede she was isolated. She was stuck in a place in the middle of nowhere. She was placed in isolation chambers on almost a weekly basis. You'll learn that she had no friends outside of the world that she lived in, and that she wasn't allowed to interact with people in the outside world. And finally, this last factor that's going to be important, an inability to escape. You'll learn that when someone enters the Covenant compound, they have to give away all of their possessions. They're taught from an early age that things like working hard for money, the things that most people do to survive in the outside world, those are evils that must be avoided at all costs. You'll learn that Alex Franklin had no job prospects, no money, no possessions, no car, no practical ability to escape from the compound. And when you put all those four things together, you have Stockholm Syndrome, a condition that made Alex Franklin unable to appreciate the difference between right and wrong, to know that what she was doing had to be stopped, to know that Raphael O'Connor, the mastermind of this terrorist attack, needed to be stopped. And at the end of this trial, my co-counsel Vicki Roslin is going to come back to you, and after looking at all this evidence and testimony here today, she's going to ask that you find Alex Franklin not guilty by reason of insanity. Thank you.
All right, let's hear the prosecution's first witness.
The prosecution calls Raphael O'Connor.
Okay.
Good morning.
Morning.
Could you please introduce yourself to the jury?
My name is Raphael O'Connor.
Were you involved in the bombing of the New York Central Reserve Bank on May 23rd, 2019?
I was.
Can you explain how you were involved?
I was one of the 3 co-conspirators that caused the bombing on the bank.
Who were your other co-conspirators?
My friend Baylor Riswald and the defendant.
Can you identify the defendant?
Yes, the defendant is the woman right there with the white T-shirt with the fancy, person with the crown.
Let the record reflect that the witness has correctly identified the defendant, Alexandra Franklin, as one of the co-conspirators.
Can't tolerate the defendant anyway, so.
You also mentioned another co-conspirator.
Yes, I did.
What was their name again?
Baylor Riswald.
Who was Baylor Riswald?
Well, Baylor Riswald was the person who helped design the bomb and was one of the other co-conspirators until she died.
Did you manage to talk to Baylor before they died?
I did not, but I later learned that Riswald wrote a suicide note.
Did you ever have a chance to look at the suicide note?
I did.
Approaching what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 10. Your Honor, may I approach?
You may.
Mr. O'Connor, what have I handed you?
This is the suicide note that Baylor Riswald left after she died.
And what does it say at the beginning of the second paragraph on the first page? Or on the second page?
Could you say that again, counsel?
Objection, hearsay.
Already, oh. Sorry, I need to redo that. Can you? Yeah, please. Do you want both pages? Mr. O'Connor, what have I handed you?
This is the suicide note that was left by Baylor Riswald.
Is this a fair and accurate representation of, or is the same or substantially similar document that you saw after Baylor Riswald committed suicide?
Yes, it is.
Your Honor, I'd like to submit exhibit that's been pre-marked as Exhibit 10 into evidence as Trial Exhibit 1.
How is this witness capable of authenticating this document?
All of the exhibits have been stipulated as authentic, and the witness has explained that they saw this immediately or in review of the materials for this trial.
So this witness can't authenticate this document?
This witness can't authenticate it, however, it has been stipulated as authentic.
Okay. So I want us to focus on that, right? If you're gonna use it with this witness, let's not try to authenticate it with them. Let's get it, offer it, say it's stipulated authentic.
Okay, so not do the,
Is it a fair and accurate? Because that means nothing with this witness.
okay, just submit and say it's been stipulated as authentic.
Thank
Okay.
you. All right, and then what would you say to a hearsay objection?
Under Rule of Evidence 804B2, this constitutes a dying declaration.
Okay. And they are unavailable. Did he testify that they committed suicide?
Yes.
Oh, I see. Okay. All right. It's exhibit 1. That's right, because we haven't done that one yet.
Mr. O'Connor, I would like to ask you about the contents of this document.
Sure.
First, what does it say in the first full paragraph on 10A? I am ready? Starts with I am ready?
I am ready to leave this world because my legacy is complete.
What legacy did it seem Baylor was talking about?
The legacy of taking part in a series of revolutionary terrorist attacks, bombings, including other acts that Baylor Riswald committed.
So it seemed that he was talking about the bombing in this manifesto?
That's correct.
On page 10B, the first sentence of the first main paragraph, where it discusses Alex Franklin.
Yes, it says, I hate Alex Franklin, that manipulative, conniving Alex found a way to gain power over Raphael. Alex influenced and controlled him. I thought I was coming back to be Raphael's partner, but instead I was just an object he could use whenever Alex wouldn't have sex with him, and he was horny.
Mr. O'Connor, I'd also like to turn to the last page of the document, where there's a diagram. What is this a diagram of?
This is a blueprint of the Iris bomb that was used in the bombing of the Central Reserve Bank.
And These are the bombs that you also helped Baylor construct?
That's correct.
Would you recognize photos of the bombs that you constructed?
Yes, it would.
I'm approaching with what's been pre-marked as exhibits 2 and 3. Mr. O'Connor, do you recognize these photographs?
Yeah, these are both photographs of two iris bombs that were both constructed by me.
And these were the bombs that Baylor helped you build?
Yes.
And these are the bombs that, based on the manifesto, the conspiracy, Alex was also involved?
That's correct.
Your Honor, are these fair and accurate representations of the bombs as they existed on May 23rd, 2019?
Yes, they were.
Your Honor, I'd like to offer exhibits 2 and 3 as trial exhibits 2 and 3.
Any objection?
No objections.
Trial exhibits 2 and 3.
Now, Mr. O'Connor, I'd like to talk a little bit more about Alex Franklin's involvement in building these bombs and the attack.
Sure.
So, how was the defendant involved with the bombing?
Alex Franklin came up with the idea of bombing the Central Reserve Bank. She also helped to assemble the bomb, plant the bomb, and ultimately detonated it at the time.
You said that she came up with the idea. When did she come up with this idea?
Well, we were watching this parade on TV, and in the background was the New York Central Reserve Bank, and that's when she told me, let's blow up the New York Central Reserve Bank.
Did she explain why she wanted to blow up the bank?
Yes, she said that her mother was killed in that exact bank in a robbery.
Did you ever talk about planning the bombing anymore?
We did.
How?
Well, none of us knew how, neither Alex nor I knew how to actually make a bomb, so that's when we agreed to reach out to my friend Baylor Riswald, who was a bomb maker.
So you talked about it over the phone, either together or with other people?
Yes, so I personally called Baylor Riswald, and then the phone was on speaker as we were talking about the exact bomb that we wanted, and Alex was right there.
When you started planning and working with Baylor Riswald, how did you start assembling the bomb?
Well, you know, as soon as Baylor had come up with the specific bomb we were looking for, the iris, I worked with Alex together, and we both, using the blueprint that is very similar to the one he left in the suicide note, assembled it together.
When you finally had the bombs ready to go, how did you plan the actual bombing?
Has he testified that the bombs are ready to go?
Mr. O'Connor, were the bombs ever ready to go?
Yes, they were. Yes, they were ultimately assembled, and they were prepared to be planted at the bank.
You have to stop leading them though.
Okay. What steps did you take to plan the actual bombing?
Well, the first thing we had to figure out was how we would ultimately plant it, because Alex said that for the bombing, she didn't want anyone to actually be hurt. She just wanted the building to collapse. So we had to plant them at some place where they wouldn't be found before closing, so that they could be blown up, probably, you know, in the middle of the night, so that nobody in the bank would be harmed.
Did you ever go into the bank?
Yes, we did. Specifically, we would do small little experiments where we put, you know, small bags, and we'd leave them under tables and things like that to see if they would, if security would catch them.
Stop saying did.
Mm-hmm.
Say how, when, where, why, things like that. Don't say did anymore.
Okay.
That's leading.
Would Alex go into the bank?
No. How did you go about doing that? What did you do? Where did she go? What did she do?
Yeah, I'm trying
Things
to get
like
you.
that.
I'm trying to
Things
get-
like that.
Okay, I'm trying to get you to say that she had a bank account,
Oh, gotcha.
because I need to
Yeah.
get that in.
Well, in order to actually have an excuse to get inside of the bank and to actually, do things there, we had Alex create a bank account.
I'm approaching with what's been pre-marked as Exhibit 7A and 7B. Mr. O'Connor, what have I handed you?
This is your bank account, the intake form.
From the bank?
Yes.
And what does it say? Whose name is on the account?
Objection. Hearsay.
This is a,
You have to put it into evidence before they can
oh,
read it.
okay.
Everything has to go in before you can say the contents of the document. It's called the document speaks for itself. That's what we say.
Your Honor, we move to admit Exhibits 7A and B into evidence. They have been stipulated as authentic.
Okay, what do you say to a hearsay objection?
They are public records, or they are business records kept by the bank in the regular course of business.
And how do we know that?
They're bank documents? I don't, what? They've, on
How do you know they're bank documents?
the at the top of Exhibit 7A, it says specifically for bank use only. Additionally, there are, all of the information on here is for the purposes of establishing a bank account.
And how do you know that the information on that is true?
It has been stipulated as authentic.
Okay. By the way, you should be making that. Okay, thank you.
And when you, and just to make things clear for the newbies, right, because this is kind of a mock trial-y thing. Very often in these packets, things are stipulated to be, quote, authentic. To put a document in, you need to worry about 4 things: relevancy, authentication, hearsay, the best evidence rule. You'll never have to really worry about the original writings piece of the best evidence rule. All you have to worry about is the part of it that says you cannot testify to the contents of a document. The document itself must be entered. The document speaks for itself. So you can't ask what's in it, because it is both hearsay if the document's in and also violates the best evidence rule. But so what you guys usually have to think about is authentication. If it's stipulated to be authentic, you don't have to worry about that. My suggestion, though, having heard this a couple of times now, is that anything that you are not really going to authenticate with a real witness that can only be authenticated through the stipulation itself, I would put them all in one big lump right at the beginning of your case. Now, it may be that the hearsay piece of that would prevent it, and that you have to do it as they come up, because the hearsay piece needs to be explained better. But basically, that's, so you might think about anything you're not really going to have a witness for, put it in right at the beginning, then it's in, and then you've got it and you can use it. Meanwhile, though, what a stipulated to be authentic means is, it is what it appears to be. Whatever it looks like to you, that's what it is. Okay, that's what that means. So if it looks like it's a bank record, it's stipulated to be authentic bank records, sort of. And that means that it was most likely, and the judge has to decide, was it or wasn't it, and the judge can consider anything in the world in making this piece of the decision. The judge, is this a bank record? I'd say, yeah, looking at it, yeah, probably if I'm the judge. So that's how that works. That's the stipulated material. That's how you make those arguments. It's stipulated authentic. That means it is what it appears to be. It certainly appears to be a bank record, which is made and kept in the ordinary course of banking business. Okay. All right. Long explanation. for something that comes up a lot, and so you guys ought to know about it. Go ahead.
Mr. O'Connor, do you know why she opened this bank account?
Yes, we had agreed ahead of time that in order for us to actually try and put things in the bank, we had to actually have a bank account and a reason to be there. So this was a way that Alex could go back and forth and we could try and figure out spots to put the bomb that wouldn't alert security.
Were there any other reasons for the bank account?
Oh, that's right. So we also worked together to purchase certain bomb materials, and so the reason we had the bank account was so that she could help make those purchases.
So the easy question would be, what did you use that bank account for?
Okay. Where did the money come from for the bank account?
Good.
The money came from the possessions that were taken because at the compound we have to, all members have to give up their possessions.
Who gave her the money?
I did.
Now, I'd like to ask more about the attack itself. What happened that day? Or what happened in the events leading up to the bomb going off?
Well, we finally found a particular spot that we could put the bomb without alerting security. We had tried putting some, like coffee cups there, and no one threw it out the next day. So eventually, Alex and I decided to put it in that specific spot under the table, and that way it would be ready to explode.
Who went into the bank to plant the bomb?
Alex Franklin.
Alone?
I did as well. I sort of created a distraction, and then as Alex helped take the bomb in, we sort of did a trade, and that's when we placed it together.
Once the bomb was in the bank, how did it blow up?
Well, the particular Iris bomb had what's called a remote text detonator, which means you send a text message or a phone call to the cell phone that's attached to the bomb, and then when it receives the call, it explodes. So in order for that to happen, someone had to text the bomb.
What's been pre-marked as Exhibit 4K. Mr. O'Connor, what have I handed you?
This is a text message that was sent to the cell phone number that was attached to the Iris bomb. So this is the text that caused the explosion.
How do you know it was sent to that bomb?
Well, number one, the cell phone number matches the cell phone that was attached, and also the date and time matches when the bomb ultimately exploded.
What are the date and time?
May 23rd, 2019 at 3:30 in the morning.
And whose phone is this?
This is Alex Franklin's phone that's being texted to the bomb.
Your Honor, I'd like to admit Exhibit 4K into evidence. It has been stipulated as authentic, and it is also a statement of party opponent.
Objections to hearsay. It's disputed as to who actually sent the text, Your Honor, at this point, so we would like to I'd like to object on the grounds of hearsay.
So you're saying that the statement by a party opponent may not apply?
Yes, Your Honor, because the party opponent may not be the person who made that statement.
Counselor?
Fall back on that it's been stipulated as authentic again?
You may not, but what is the statement within, or what is the text?
The text, if not a statement of party opponent, would fall under the conspirator exception because it is done in furtherance
What
of
are
the
the
conspiracy.
words in the text?
It says it's a command.
Okay, so why don't you tell me what the words of the text are?
If I may be heard outside the presence of the jury, the substance of the text is the word boom and a smiley face.
And what is the statement, what statement is being offered for the truth of the matter asserted there?
We are not offering any proof as to the truth of the word boom. We want to admit it to show that there was an effect from the words, specifically the bomb went off. It is an odd use of the effect on the listener rule.
Well, it's not an effect on the listener, but it is not a statement being offered for the truth of the matter asserted. It is just a command that went to the bomb to set it off. right?
Yes.
It could have been a text that just said 1, 2, 3, and you would still be offering it for the same exact purpose, right?
Yes, so
It
what,
doesn't really matter what the words are.
okay,
So you're not offering the content or the words for the truth of it, or any truth of anything there.
It's
Simply that a text was sent from this phone
okay.
to the bond.
And then you don't worry about statement by the party opponent anymore, and then I will deny your rejection. And it'll be entered as trial exhibit, I believe.
5.
Is it 5 now?
5, because 7A and B is 4.
Got it. All right, very good.
Mr. O'Connor, what did you learn about what happened after the text was sent?
Well, I learned that Alex Franklin was the person who sent the bomb.
Did you learn, or what happened to the bomb?
The bomb actually went off, and we got to see it, so.
In your opinion, what was Alex's role in planning this full attack?
Alex Franklin was the architect, no question.
I don't think you can really get that question without an objection from most people. Just to let you know, over there on the other side there, we should be objecting to that.
How would I get that?
Opinion,
question?
that's an opinion.
That's an
You
opinion.
asked him his opinion. If you're gonna ask somebody's opinion, just don't say the word opinion. You
Okay.
could at least say, what was the role?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, in your opinion, what was the role? And in your opinion, your lay witness opinion, rationally based on your perceptions, made without any, let's just say, so what was her role?
She was the architect, yeah.
Mr. O'Connor, I
It's
want.
still an opinion, by the way, and probably could be objected to, but it doesn't sound like it, so you'll probably sneak that one by.
Let's see, yeah.
Okay. Mr. O'Connor, I want to ask about why Alex Franklin wanted to blow up the bomb or blow up the bank. Did she ever mention? No, can't ask. Did. Why did she want that bank?
Objection, speculation.
He can answer if she knows, or he can answer if he knows.
Alex Franklin specifically told me that this was the bomb where, this was the bank where her mother had died in a bank robbery.
Did you learn anything else?
We had learned.
I'm
And
sorry.
In all my years of study, nope.
I also learned from Alex that the specific date, May 23rd was the day that her mother died, so that was also the date that she wanted to bomb the bank.
And why the choice of that date?
That's a way
Yeah.
better.
Yeah.
Mr. O'Connor, the defense plans to explain that Alex Franklin suffered from something called Stockholm Syndrome, and she was a captive. What do you think of that?
If you think Alex Franklin is...
Why would this witness be able to testify to a medical diagnosis?
And the question, what do you think of it, is a little on the vague side.
Yeah.
But,
Okay.
and can I preface the whole thing with that? Are we allowed to talk about this on the prosecution side? Normally you can't.
There's the way that it got set up was that the defense had to give notice, and the prosecution has at least some burden to disprove.
Okay.
Okay, I'm trying to figure out how to start the breakdown of the
Well, let me ask you this, and let me ask you. Do you know what the elements of Stockholm Syndrome are?
Me?
Yes, you.
No. Well, I mean, I do from looking at this case, but
Yes. Okay, so you know what the elements are.
yeah.
Does he know facts that will either prove or disprove those elements?
Yes.
So can you ask him questions about those facts without necessarily talking about Stockholm Syndrome?
Yes.
Oh, then let's do that.
Okay. Mr. O'Connor, when the defendant was at the compound, was she ever forced to do anything?
No. In fact, all of the rituals that any member of the compound would perform were voluntary. No one was forced to do anything.
Would you ever threaten Alex Franklin?
No, absolutely not.
Would you ever isolate her?
No, like I said, everything was.
Did, not would. Here I'm gonna allow you to use did.
Okay, I have it written down as did. I was like, no, you can't use that word anymore.
And let's not waste time with this, because you
Okay.
know from your expert, there's really only one or two elements you're killing,
Yeah.
right? So let's just focus on those.
Okay, because now I want to get to the isolation, and you didn't isolate her.
Yeah.
Well,
Well,
what
Jerry,
are the
put your hands on her.
hold on, what are the two things that we discussed last week are the things that you're gonna focus on as saying not Stockholm Syndrome?
Threat. There was no threat,
No, not threat,
or he didn't threaten her.
not threat.
Would be what?
There's no actual physical abuse, right? Your expert says he never physically abused her. So we're gonna talk about that. And what's the other one?
He didn't isolate her.
Isolation.
Inability to escape.
The inability to escape. She had access to a car. She had access to a lot of things. She has actually left the compound to go to school, right?
Yeah.
Those are the things you talk about. So let's not waste time with all of the things. Let's hammer home what's important, because then there'll be the repetition that you get throughout the trial. Okay.
Could she ever leave the compound?
Yes, in fact, she would go to community college. So as part of that, I would pay for her schooling.
How did she get to the college?
I would personally drop her off and pick her up.
Okay.
How does she have access to those cars independent of him?
Technically, yes, but
Okay, so let's get that.
okay.
Yeah.
Who else had access to cars at the compound?
Anyone, including Alex Franklin.
I have a few final questions I'd like to ask you. Have you taken responsibility for your role in the bombing?
Yes, I have. I pled guilty after I was arrested and faced charges.
And why are you testifying today?
Well, as a condition of my plea deal with the prosecution, I'm required to testify against my co-conspirators truthfully as to what happened.
And what were you charged with specifically?
Conspiracy to use a weapon of mass destruction, use of a weapon of mass destruction, conspiracy to destroy government property, and destruction of government property.
And how did you plead to these charges?
Well, I pled guilty to the use of the destruction of government property and the use of weapons of mass destruction. In return, that both of the conspiracy charges be dropped.
And to clarify, you said you must testify truthfully,
That is correct.
and have you testified truthfully?
I have.
No further questions.
All right, cross-examination.
Hello, Mr. O'Connor.
Good afternoon. Or morning.
I'm first going to talk to you about the abuse that Ms. Franklin suffered while living on the compound. You witnessed her abuse at some point, right?
Well, to be clear, okay.
At one point, you witnessed her abuse. Is that correct?
She was assaulted by her father, Ray Franklin, and I stopped him from assaulting her.
So by short, yes, you did see that abuse.
Yes,
In fact, you saved her that's one of those times. Is that correct?
that's right.
Her father was beating her when he found the cell phone, correct?
Yes, that was the main reason. I'd given her a secret cell phone.
And the cell phone, that you gave her was against the rules of the compound.
Yes,
And you set those rules?
I did set those rules.
Okay. Now I want to talk to you about how you were kind to her. Like you stated, you gave her a cell phone, right?
Yes,
You paid for her college.
yes,
You drove her to college.
yes,
And in fact, on the night that her father almost beat her to death, you saved her.
yes, I did.
And now I want to talk about how Ms. Franklin was isolated to your community.
Well, to be clear, she wasn't isolated from the community. Everything was voluntary.
I want to go back to the cell phone.
Sure.
She was only allowed to text you, isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And when she would go to university, she would have to come straight home.
Yes, the main reason.
And was she allowed to spend time with friends after class?
Generally, no. Her place was in the compound.
Okay, thank you. And now I want to talk to you about her ways that she could leave the compound. You say anyone can join freely, isn't that correct?
That's right.
And as part of joining the compound, they have to give up all of their possessions.
That's right. Voluntarily. No one's forced.
Their cell phones,
Yes.
their cars,
Yes.
their homes,
Yes.
everything except for the clothes on their back.
Yes.
If they left, would they have anything, so they would have no money?
No. Well, because
No car,
no, because they voluntarily gave it up.
and no communication.
Well, we had the cars in the compound where you could go to the outside world, but other than that, you're talking about like cell phones in general.
Yes.
No, because cell phones were generally not allowed.
Okay. All right, Mr. O'Connor, I want to finally talk about your sweetheart deal. How old are you? You're 47, right?
Yes.
And you were given a sweetheart deal to testify today, isn't that right?
If you mean by sweetheart deal, my guilty plea where I have to spend 15 years in prison, yes.
So yes?
Not a sweetheart deal.
Okay. In exchange for this deal, you, some of your charges were dropped. The same charges that Ms. Franklin was charged with, isn't that right?
Yes, the conspiracy to destroy government property, the use of weapons of mass destruction, all that stuff.
Okay. So your testimony today will keep you out of jail for the rest of your life, isn't that right?
Well, most likely because they dropped part of the conspiracy charges, so.
All right, thank you.
Okay, redirect.
Mr. O'Connor, you never hit Alex Franklin, did you?
No,
In fact, you saved her from people who were being hit.
that's absolutely right.
And you never told her she could never leave the compound.
No.
Speeding.
Sorry, I just got derailed.
What did you tell her about whether she could leave the compound? That's the way you can ask that non-leading.
What did you ask, or what did you tell her about leaving the compound?
I would tell her she was free to leave because she was.
What did you tell her about going to school?
I told her she was free to go to school because she was, and in fact, I paid for her schooling.
No further questions.
Okay. Witness is excused. Prosecution call first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The prosecution calls Detective Reagan Lewis, or
Okay.
Lewin, sorry.
Take a stand. We can get started. I'll be right there.
Good morning. Good morning.
Would you be able to state your name and occupation for the record?
Yes, my name is Regan Lewin, Lewin, and I work for the FBI in the Special Investigative Division as a behavioral psychoanalyst.
And why are you here today?
I'm here today because I was the lead investigator in the bombing of the Central Reserve Bank.
Okay. And how does one become a special investigator?
Well, when you join the FBI, you do 3 months of basic training, 2 months in special investigations, and I did 3 months in criminal psychoanalytic behavior training.
And how many investigations have you conducted?
I've conducted 17,
And of those 17, how many have resulted in convictions?
12.
And of those original 17, how many actually involved charges of conspiracy to use weapons of mass destruction?
12.
And have you reviewed any materials prepared for today?
I did. I reviewed the sworn testimony of the defendant and Mr. O'Connor. I reviewed the expert report by Dr. Pander, and all the evidence for all the case today, for all the evidence that was presented for trial today.
Now, I'd like to talk to you for a moment about the defendant. How is it that you first met the defendant?
I first met the defendant while I infiltrated the compound. Yes, when I infiltrated the compound.
Can you tell us a little bit more about your time on the compound?
When I joined the compound, I viewed some very interesting practices. They would isolate people in isolation chambers, and they would have all of the individuals living on the compound do labor for long periods of time, and they also practice starvation practices.
What else did you notice?
I noticed that the defendant and Mr. O'Connor were really close, and they isolated themselves along with Baylor Riswold.
What stood out to you specifically about Riswold?
Well, I called into SID and I had them run Baylor Riswold's name through their system, and they found that Baylor Riswold was wanted for bombing. Was in the investigation for a bombing in Toronto.
When did you first suspect that the defendant was planning a bombing?
I noticed that the defendant and Baylor Riswold would leave to go off the compound, and that's when I called SID and I had them follow them as they left the compound. And when they came back, it seemed like they had come back from a hardware store, and they had lots of bags with items in them.
Were you ever able to look inside those bags?
At one point, I did try to look inside the bags, but then I was confronted by Miss Franklin.
What happened?
She stopped me and she threatened me.
Threatened you? How so?
She threatened me by telling me that if I didn't mind my own business, they would find business for me to mind.
Counsel, I am approaching with Exhibit 4H. Does that look to be the same or substantially the same as the evidence that you had reviewed for this?
What is it?
What is it?
This is a text exchange between Raphael O'Connor and Miss Franklin.
Does it look the same, or is it a fair and accurate representation of?
Do you care that this person knows if this is very accurate?
And why does it matter that she's even seen it before?
Because it's about her.
Okay, how are you authenticating this?
It's already been stipulated as authentic.
Okay, so, and is it hearsay? Because I don't even know what it is, so I'm just asking you to go through the checklist with me.
It is not hearsay because it's a statement of party opponent and also of co-conspirators, or you're not a co-conspirator, so never mind. Statement of party
It
opponent.
doesn't matter
Yeah,
what
I'm
it
not
is.
sure what
The other person in the conversation is a
Yes,
co-conspirator, right?
yes.
We don't care what, this person wasn't part of that.
Okay.
Okay, so so once again, this witness is not authenticating this document.
No.
So you want to offer it in its
Okay.
authentic form before you bring it to the witness, basically. You want to have
Okay.
Exhibit 5, it's been stipulated to be authentic,
Okay.
and I offer it into evidence. And if they say hearsay, you say whatever your hearsay response is, and then it comes into evidence. Now you say, I'm handing you Exhibit 5, which I just put into evidence, blah, blah, blah.
Okay.
I'll do it.
Is it 4H? Yeah. Your Honor, I'd like to offer what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 4H into the record.
All right, and how are you meeting the foundational elements of bringing this in? What is it?
It is a text exchange between the defendant and Mr. O'Connor.
And it has been
And-
And it
stipulated.
has been stipulated as authentic.
Thank you. Any objection?
For the sake of her practice, I object on the grounds of hearsay.
It is not hearsay, Your Honor, because or assuming I'm heard outside the presence of the jury, it is not hearsay, Your Honor, because it is a statement of party opponent and
So
statement of
anytime you
co-conspirators.
respond to an objection, remember how we do this, right?
Mhm.
What comes, outside the president's jury,
Mhm.
what comes first? Your argument or something else? Yes. Give me an offer of proof first. What is, so we have a document.
Yeah.
It is a text conversation between the defendant
Mhm.
and Mr. O'Connor, her co-conspirator. It is not hearsay because it's a statement from a party
Okay.
opponent and a co-conspirator.
Okay.
See how it's much more
Yeah.
fluid that way?
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Assuming we are heard outside of the presence of the jury, what is being offered is a statement between the defendant and her co-conspirator. Therefore, it is not hearsay because it is a statement of party opponent and a statement between co-conspirators.
Official.
Thank you.
It is admitted as, what are we on, 8?
6, I think.
We are on trial exhibit 6.
Yeah.
6, sorry.
So I am approaching with exhibit, what is now trial exhibit 6. What is that?
It is a text message exchange between Raphael O'Connor and Miss Franklin.
Would you be able to read that out loud?
Yes. You told me to let you know if Chris keeps asking questions, or question mark with an S. Well, he just approached me and asked about CRB. Mr. O'Connor responds, K, Bay and I will handle, good job Lexi, and then equal sign, parentheses, exclamation points.
Did anything happen, or what happened after that?
Raphael O'Connor, Alex Franklin, and Baylor Riswald stormed into my room, and Baylor Riswald beat me.
What did the defendant do?
Miss Franklin stood there, and then she said that I should leave the compound to not to mess with their plans.
And what happened after that?
They locked me in an isolation chamber for 48 hours.
What happened after? Were you ever able to escape the isolation chamber?
I did escape the isolation chamber, and I went to retrieve my clothes.
What is an isolation chamber anyway? Do we know this? Or is this common knowledge, or is it in the record, or what is the deal with that?
I think it's in the record. They're like converted porta potties.
Well, all right, if it's in the record, I'd like to hear it, because I'm sitting here going, all right, they put me in isolation chamber. All right, now what happened next? Wait, what's this
Okay.
isolation chamber stuff?
Okay. So
Thank you.
what exactly is an isolation chamber?
As part of the practices of the covenant, in order to what they did is they converted these porta potties into chambers where they would lock people in for hours on end.
Okay. And how long were you in there for?
I was in there for 48 hours.
And what happened after you were able to escape?
I went to retrieve my clothing. They had stripped me before they locked me in there, so I retrieved my service weapon.
I didn't know that. I should have known that when I heard about isolation chambers. How does this isolation chamber shit work? Well, you don't say it that way, but you know. Come on,
I'll testify.
follow along with, have the blank mind of a juror.
Okay. So
But go ahead,
Yeah.
I interrupted.
so how
They stripped her.
yeah. Okay. So how does it work to be locked in an isolation chamber?
Well, in this specific instance, they stripped me and they took my service weapon and locked me in there for 48 hours.
Okay. And were you ever able to escape?
Yes, I was.
While you're in there, do you get food, water?
No, it's like you're locked in there for, like, they normally do
I
it.
think that might be too much detail for this person to say what happened while she was in there.
Yeah.
She only then just says that she eventually escapes.
Oh, she doesn't have any detail of what happens in there?
No.
No,
really,
we do
yeah.
know generally what could happen,
Mhm.
but we wouldn't necessarily know what happened to this person.
Alright.
So what happened after you were able to escape?
I grabbed my clothes, I grabbed my service weapon, and I found my phone and I placed it in the charger, and then I went looking for Raphael O'Connor.
Did you ever find O'Connor?
I didn't, but I did go into his home. I broke into his home, and I went to his personal trash can, and I found a cap, a PVC pipe, and explosives.
Why were you looking through his trash?
I'm looking for evidence because I suspected that they were committing a crime.
Okay. Now, how did you learn about the bombing?
I called for an extraction from SID, and they came to pick me up. And as we were driving away from the compound, we could see the bank in flames.
And how do you know that a bomb was the cause of the destruction?
When I went to go investigate the crime scene, we found bomb fragments at the crime scene.
I'm approaching with what is marked as trial exhibit 2. It's the fragment. Is that the fragment that you found on scene?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I'm also approaching with pretrial exhibit 5A. Your Honor, I would like to have this introduced as evidence that has been stipulated as authentic.
Okay, any objection?
Your Honor, both parties have waived any objections to this exhibit, so no.
So it's been stipulated as admissible?
Yes, Your Honor.
Actually, it's not stipulated, there's already an order that it's admissible, right?
That's correct.
So tell us that.
It has already been ordered as being admissible without objection. Now, what is that?
This is the fingerprint analysis of a fingerprint found on the bomb fragment.
And what does that analysis say?
Would you like me to read it word for word?
I would not. I would. Sorry. How through this analysis, how were you able to figure out who this fingerprint belongs to, or were you able to figure out who this fingerprint belongs to?
Yes. They did they analyzed 3 people's fingerprints when determining which fingerprint this was, and they found a 99% likelihood that this fingerprint was made by Ms. Franklin.
Okay. Now I'd like to take a step back for a moment and talk to you about some other work that you do for the FBI, if that's okay.
Okay.
You had previously mentioned in this testimony that you work as a behavioral psych analyst for the FBI. Would you be able to tell us a little bit more about how you received qualifications for that?
Yes, I did my undergrad at NYU, studying sociology, and then I proceeded to do my master's and PhD at Columbia, pursuing psychiatry. My master's thesis was well-renowned and has lots of awards and acclaim. So.
Okay. What exactly does a behavioral psych analyst do?
A behavioral psychoanalyst will be able to look at evidence presented before them and then determine different behavioral aspects of the criminal nature behind these. I'm sorry. Essentially, I use my psychiatry degree to help with my investigations when it comes to involving different investigations, and my expertise comes from cult investigations.
I'm trying to figure out how to ask this without it being leading. What other services do you provide for individuals who have already been taken into custody?
Oh, I do psychological evaluations of individuals when they are in custody.
Okay. Now, have you ever heard of something called Stockholm Syndrome?
Yes, I have.
How exactly would one test for Stockholm Syndrome?
So Stockholm Syndrome isn't considered a recognized diagnosis under the American Psychological Association, and it's often interchanged between terms of trauma bonding. There's multiple tests that can be used, but there are 4 generalized concepts when it comes to determining whether or not a person has this Stockholm Syndrome.
Okay. What are those 4 factors?
They are threat, which means that there is a psychological and physical abuse of the victim by the abuser. The second being kindness. This means that a kindness from the abuser to the victim. The third is isolation, meaning that they are isolated from the views of others than the abuser. And fourth is no escape, meaning that they have no perceived way of escaping the situation they're in.
In order to classify or diagnose someone with having Stockholm Syndrome, do all 4 of those factors need to be met?
Yes, all 4 need to be met.
All 4 need to be met, okay. Have all 4 been met in this case?
They have not been met in this case.
Which of the factors are missing?
The first factor, threat. Mr. O'Connor, who is the Mr. O'Connor was not identified as the abuser. So he also never put any physical. He never physically abused her.
Why do you believe that there is no evidence of abuse between Mr. O'Connor and the defendant?
Based on all the evidence that I received and looked at, and by my own interactions between the two of them, I never witnessed any abuse.
Okay.
And I also don't believe that there was any.
That's a leading question. Hold on, sorry. Did you review the defense's expert testimony of Dr. Pander before testifying today?
Yes.
Yes. So do you agree with Dr. Pander's finding that the defendant attached her fear of her father onto O'Connor?
No, I do not.
You do not. Why?
In the rare cases of Stockholm Syndrome that are there is a clear and direct line between the abuser and the victim when it comes to the physical and psychological abuse. In this case, there is no connection.
So to clarify, the threat of abuse cannot be met without psychological and physical abuse from the abuser to the victim. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay.
Check or leading
Okay.
would be sustained.
Okay.
So ask it again.
So to clarify, would the threat factor be met with?
So first of all, you're not even exploring threat, so I don't know why we're asking that question, right? It's not threat of violence, it's actual, this witness says there's no actual physical abuse and therefore you cannot have Stockholm syndrome, right?
Well, I thought that was a part of, it's like the threat has to be like the threat of abuse has to be both psychological and physical.
Okay. So
I'm worried that that's awfully tight. I'm sitting here on the jury thinking, what do you mean it has to be physical? I mean, has to be for what? For this syndrome? Why is this syndrome? What's the thing about it? See, my understanding of Stockholm Syndrome basically is it comes from some kidnapping, wasn't it? Something where they held people hostage in Stockholm. Now, I haven't even heard that yet, and I don't even know if you can say that because maybe they haven't told you that. I don't know, but I think that somebody has to say, why are we talking about this place in Sweden? That's one thing. So Stockholm Syndrome. Now, you guys argued, well, we shouldn't even talk about Stockholm Syndrome. That's not even anything. And then the first thing you do is say, so tell me about Stockholm Syndrome. I haven't even heard that other term you used yet. So I'm not quite sure what you guys are going after there with that piece. But I wouldn't even make a difference. If sitting on the jury, that means nothing to me, whether you call it Stockholm Syndrome, whether you call it this other thing where they bond with their abuser or something. It's all the same thing to me. As I understand it, the way it works is this. It's just like spouse abuse. It's like there's the isolation, there's the taking away of the possessions, Then there's the threat of abuse, whether it's physical or psychological, and then you need both or else you don't qualify. I'm saying, no. I don't like that rule, counsel. Sitting here on the jury. I think if you got either one of them, you should qualify. But because I think the whole idea is that people bond with those who have power over them in an effort to make that power less threatening. That's what I think is happening there. But I don't know because I'm not a psychologist. But whatever it is, you got to tell me, well, there was this thing in Stockholm where they held him prisoner. And then when they got out, when they let him go, they all liked the people who held him. How could that be, you might ask yourself? Well, it's a psychological factor. I don't understand it either, but we got a psychologist to tell you about it. Now, they're going to tell you that there's 4 things that you need to identify this. And here's the 4 things. And here's why it doesn't work in this case. And I know you got to use your expert. Tom's telling you. Your expert tells you, here's the way it doesn't work. And you got to go with what your expert says. Because if you have a totally different theory, wonderful for you. You got no testimony to support it.
Okay.
So I've got, but at the same time, you got to sell what your expert says to the jury. So why is this not, why is she not brainwashed? I don't care about Stockholm Syndrome factor. Why is it that you say as the government, she did this stuff of her own free will, not because she was under his spell?
Okay.
Why is it? Tell me. What is the difference between, why is she not really under his spell? That's what you got to show. She's not under his spell. Why? What
Because
is it?
she has, like, in everything that she did, she exhibited, like, a willingness and excitement to actually plan and, execute this bombing.
She would be able to do that if she had Stockholm Syndrome. In
Why
fact,
not?
that's the reason why they're.
Why not?
Yeah.
Well, she wants to do it because she's in love with this guy and she thinks he's God. Right? And it's a cult. Right?
So there's testimony that, or I guess I have to bring it out, that in her expert report that people with Stockholm Syndrome don't show a general understanding of the difference between right and wrong, and in the defendant's affidavit and written statement says that I learned very young the difference between right and wrong. I know what right and wrong is, and I know that what I did was wrong now because of the fact that I was, so heavily influenced by this guy. And I'm supposed to bring it out of you that, in everything that, she witnessed in her time on the compound, that, no, she very clearly knew what was right and wrong. She had a willingness to plan, that she wanted to do this. It wasn't just because she felt like this undue influence of this guy.
But, okay, and then the other thing I'm hearing, though, is that the father's the abuser and the cult leader is the savior, right? Is that what's going on here? So, and that's what you're trying to establish right now, in a sense, is that the physical abuse didn't come from him, it came from the father, so she wouldn't be afraid of him. Why would she be afraid of him? And so I think that's the way you want to put it.
That's
So you got, you got to keep it in the minds. It's just the simple minds of people who don't know what you know.
Okay.
There's a lot of stuff you guys know now.
We have a little bit of a problem here because what you're communicating is not what you have in this argument. All right, so the 2 things that this witness gives us for non-Stockholm Syndrome is he's not the abuser, and she was allowed to leave. Those are the things she breaks down for us. And the idea that the other stuff of, she knew right from wrong, well, that's not really it, because she's saying she didn't know right from wrong at the time, which is the Stockholm Syndrome. If you have Stockholm Syndrome, you don't know right from wrong. You're just doing whatever this person wants you to do, right? So that's not what you're focusing on with this witness. We don't focus on that.
Okay.
Because that's just saying she has Stockholm. She understands now because she has medication and she has therapy and she has all these things. But she didn't understand that. You just have to you gotta knock out Stockholm Syndrome. That's what we're doing in this point.
So in Stockholm Syndrome, they couldn't leave, they were kidnapped, right? They were held hostage. Was this person held hostage? No, she was allowed to leave.
Yeah.
We had cars, she could get in the car anytime and drive away.
In
You
fact,
know? Oh, I thought she didn't have it, I thought she gave up her car. Well, but they were community cars. They were like, you don't give it up exactly. This is the way I'd be playing this, by the way. You don't really give it up. It's like belongs to everybody now. And so it belonged to her just as much as everybody.
Okay.
And so could she live? Sure. So what? And the other thing is so in Stockholm Syndrome, they're afraid of this person, and so they follow their orders. Did you know anything about whether she was afraid of this guy? No, he never beat her or anything else, as far as I can tell. Well, who was she afraid of? Her father. Okay, something like that.
right.
Okay.
So that's all. Now you're done with that piece. Go on to the next piece. Part of what we're doing is way too long. Everything's way too long. So and then we
Okay.
make it longer. Thanks. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm stopping you and yelling. So come back to so talk to her now about Stockholm Syndrome is something about they have to be kept in is it
So the way
isolation?
it works under this framework in the case, how it works is essentially someone is an abuser or at least threatens to abuse,
Right.
then does something nice to them, which then causes them to sort of pull in. Then you isolate them from the rest of the world and prevent them from ever being able to escape.
Yes.
And that locks them in.
I got and I've picked that up as the 4 points and stuff, the 4 pieces and stuff. My suggestion is that you change 3 and 4, put them ahead of 1 and 2.
Sure.
Because and I say that because I like the I think of you're isolated and you're cut off and all of that stuff, and then people are abusing you, and then somebody's nice.
Right.
So somebody's nice is the
And then you
end.
see
So
that.
I give up. I'm ready to go.
Okay.
So that's the sort of thing how I see it. But so and then taking it in that order, what can she counter?
Okay.
Right, 2 of those things. They could leave, and he didn't abuse her.
Okay. Okay. So
So we don't want to do all 4, just those 2.
yeah. So why do you believe that there is no evidence of abuse between O'Connor and the defendant?
After reading all of the affidavits and also my own interactions with Ms. Franklin and Mr. O'Connor, I did not see any abuse, and I don't believe that there is any.
Who did abuse the defendant?
Ray Franklin, her father.
Did you was a leading question. Okay, so did you review Dr. Pander's report in light of giving your testimony today?
I did.
You did. Do you agree with Dr. Pander's finding that the defendant attached her fear of her father onto O'Connor?
No.
Why?
In the rare cases of Stockholm Syndrome that have been reviewed, there is a direct link between the abuser and the victim. And in this case, Mr. O'Connor is not the abuser, and therefore she shouldn't be afraid of him. And there is no Stockholm Syndrome here.
I would like to take a step back for one moment. Have you ever, how were you able to get off the compound?
I called into SID and they extracted me from the compound.
Were you ever able to take one of those cars?
The cars in the compound?
Yes.
Yes, I was able to take anyone had access to these cars. So
Who
as,
owned the cars?
the Covenant, or rather Mr. O'Connor.
But they were free for fleeting.
Well, so here's the thing. It's just as important that the witnesses understand the answers as the advocate understands the witness. We just talked about that we should be presenting these as more community cars.
Yeah.
than they are,
Okay. Yeah.
Which means that the witness should not be saying, Mr. O'Connor owns them.
Yeah.
Right.
Should be saying, the witness should be saying, everyone has access.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
That way you don't have to then come back with,
Well, they belong to the covenant, don't they?
What's that?
Do they belong to the covenant?
Mhm.
Yeah,
Same
Exactly.
way. They belong to the group.
Okay,
Okay.
okay.
Yeah.
And who was able to use these cars?
Anyone could.
Anyone could?
Why didn't you? Why did you just tell me you couldn't a minute ago? I thought
Well,
you had to get extracted by the government.
Well, when you like go to follow Griswold to the casinos, you do use a car.
I do use a car that
yeah,
time?
yeah, you
Yeah,
like,
that's
like,
right.
follow
That's
her
right.
out, yeah,
Yes.
or him, her, whatever. Okay, so we just established that. I just totally lost my train of thought. Oh, this is awful. Okay. So who was able to use the cars? Everyone was able to use the cars. Cool. Let that sit for like a hot second. So based on your knowledge, training, and professional experience, have you formed an opinion as to a reasonable degree of medical certainty as to whether the defendant had Stockholm Syndrome?
Yes.
And what is that opinion?
That the defendant does not have Stockholm
Is
syndrome.
there any stipulation that this witness is qualified to make that opinion somewhere? Because boy, I wouldn't be letting them.
it seems
It's a
pretty
medical
suggestible
opinion.
based on the.
You asked for a medical opinion too, even if I did it, at least I would say, do you an opinion to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty? Does she have a psychologist degree? She doesn't have a
A
medical.
degree in
I'm a
psychiatry.
psychiatrist.
Psychiatry.
Yeah, which was, I guess.
Oh, an MD.
Yeah.
You're
Yes.
an MD too?
Yeah.
Oh, all right, I apologize. then.
Yeah.
I didn't realize we had an MD FBI.
Oh
Jeez.
yeah, she's
holy
at, she's
mackerel.
at
Every initial in the book. All right,
So
sorry.
what is that opinion?
I just thought it was an FBI agent with taking courses.
They give this person a lot of backup.
Yeah, this person is like everything to
All
this
right,
case.
all right. All right.
In that opinion, she does not have Stockholm syndrome.
No?
Yeah, okay, no further.
Cross-examination?
Yes, Your Honor. Special Agent Lewin, I want to talk to you about the opinions you formed with respect to whether Alex Franklin had Stockholm Syndrome in this case. Now, you testified earlier that the American Psychological Association doesn't recognize Stockholm Syndrome, isn't that right?
Yes, it's not in their DSM.
But they do recognize something called trauma bonding, don't they?
Yes.
And is it true that most psychologists use the terms trauma bonding and Stockholm Syndrome interchangeably?
That is true.
In fact, even you think Stockholm Syndrome is a real psychological disorder.
I do.
So, now that we've established that you think Stockholm Syndrome is real, I want to talk about the factors that are necessary to prove Stockholm Syndrome in a specific case. Now, in order to prove Stockholm Syndrome, there have to be 4 factors present in a patient, right?
Yes.
Factors like a threat to a person's personal safety, either physical or psychologically speaking,
Yes.
by the hands of the abuser.
Yes.
Second, small acts of kindness that are designed to turn a victim to the side of their captor.
That is correct.
Third, isolation from others.
I would clarify to say that's the isolation from the beliefs of others.
From the beliefs of others. And fourth, an inability to escape.
That's correct, yes.
Now, you testified earlier there are 2 reasons why you think Alex Franklin doesn't have Stockholm Syndrome, right?
That is correct.
One of them is that you don't think Raphael O'Connor was Alex Franklin's abuser, right?
He wasn't.
And the other reason you gave was that there wasn't an inability to escape for Alex Franklin, right?
Yes, she was free to leave the compound.
So you concede that the other factors of Stockholm Syndrome are met in this case.
Sure.
So now that we've established those factors, and I want to talk about, for the sake of saving time, because we agree on a bunch of these, let's focus on the ones that we disagree on. Is that all right with you?
Sure.
So I want to start with your claim that Raphael O'Connor was not identified as the abuser. I'm approaching the witness with what has been pre-marked as Exhibit 9. Counsel?
Mhm.
These are Alex Franklin's medical records, isn't that right?
Yes.
And you reviewed them as part of this case in order to determine whether Alex Franklin had Stockholm Syndrome.
That is correct.
Your Honor, we ask that this document be entered into evidence as Trial Exhibit 7. It has been stipulated as Alex Franklin's medical records and would therefore qualify under the medical records hearsay exception.
Any objection?
No, Your Honor.
Business records.
Oh, those are too. That could work.
Just say medical records is not an actual exception. They're just part of business records.
Well, it's a statement of diagnosis, because they're like intake forms. So I guess it would fall into that one too. So I would want to
Could be, some people say that.
Yeah,
We got an argument.
Trial Exhibit 7?
yes. So, Special Agent Bloom, I want to talk about some of the things that are, and permission to publish copies to the juries while you're on.
Thank you.
And give an extra copy. Thank you. The Special Agent Blue one, I want to talk about some of the indicators that are contained inside this medical record, starting with page 1. Do you see the section that says notes?
Yes.
So it says in this medical record that Alex Franklin had a sprained wrist, right?
Yes.
Localized trauma,
Yes.
slight bruises on other parts of the arm.
Yes.
It then says that she was questioned about how she got these things, right?
Yes.
And she claimed it was a lacrosse injury.
That is correct.
But the doctor ultimately believed that she was probably lying about that as the cause of the injury.
Yes.
And she was then referred to psychiatry under Dr. Leslie Pander, who is the defendant's expert witness. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
So I want to talk to you about the second page. Do you mind turning to that as well?
Yes.
So that one says that there's a laceration to her left arm. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And that was detailed on May 11, 2017.
May 11th. Yes.
And it says that she had to have 8 stitches in order to take care of that laceration. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And she was again referred to psychiatry under Dr. Pander.
That's correct.
I want to take you to the third page. This one is dated June 10th, 2018. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And in the notes section it says recurrent patient. Isn't
Yes.
that right?
That's correct. Yes.
That means that she's been there a lot of times, right? It says severe bruising on arm, sternum, 2 cracked ribs, doesn't it?
Yes.
It says some facial laceration, right?
Yes.
That means she has cuts on her face.
That's correct.
It also says that she has a possible concussion.
That is correct.
It then goes on to say possible domestic violence, doesn't it? That's
Yes, it
on the
does.
third line from the bottom.
Yes, it does.
Okay. Permission to retrieve and publish to the bench. To the clerk's bench. To the clerk's bench. So, Special Agent Lewin, you concede that Alex Franklin was being physically abused.
Yes.
But what you claim is that it wasn't Raphael O'Connor who was laying his hands on her, right?
That's correct.
But he used a different weapon, didn't he?
I'm sorry?
He used Ray Franklin to assault Alex Franklin, didn't he?
Objection, speculation?
She can answer if she knows.
Raphael O'Connor directed Ray Franklin to assault Alex Franklin. Isn't that correct?
That is correct.
In fact, in June 22nd of 2015, Raphael O'Connor specifically ordered Ray Franklin to punch Alex Franklin to the ground. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
So I want to talk about the second reason you claim that Alex Franklin doesn't have Stockholm Syndrome, and that's an inability to escape. Now, what you claim is Alex Franklin had all these cars, had all this ability to get outside of the outside world. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I was able to escape from the compound. I'm sure she would be able to as well.
Let's talk about what would happen after she would escape from the compound. Now, if you're part of the Covenant compound, you have to give away all your possessions. Isn't that right?
That's right.
Your money,
Yes.
your food,
Yes.
your house.
Yes.
You give away your car, right?
That's correct.
You're also taught a bunch of things when you're at the compound, isn't that right?
Yes.
You're taught that capitalism is evil,
That is correct.
that working hard for money and getting paid for the hard work you do, that's a no-no, right?
That is correct.
So Alex Franklin had lived in that compound for 6 years before this bombing, isn't that right?
Yes, that would be
From the
correct.
age of 13 to the age of 19.
That is correct, yes.
So in those 6 years, Alex Franklin was learning that if she ever went into the outside world, She couldn't work for money, could she?
I guess.
She had no job skills, right?
Well, she was able to do manual labor.
So you're saying that she could live her life living manual labor, right?
Yes.
But she had no concept of money, did she?
No.
No life skills whatsoever, did she?
No.
Dr. Special Agent Lewin, I do want to talk about this, the other discussion that you talk about in your report, and that's about Raphael O'Connor. Now, you first met Raphael O'Connor in October of 2018, isn't that right?
That is correct.
You were going to a conference that he was giving a speech at, right?
That is correct.
Now, you thought a lot of things about that speech, didn't you?
I did.
You thought he was charming,
Yes.
intelligent.
Yes.
He used certain psychological tactics to get people to join his cause, didn't he?
Yes.
Ultimately, you agreed to join the compound as part of the undercover operation.
I did.
Now, as you were working and existing more along, well, let me back up for a second. As you were in that compound, you started developing further psychological opinions as to Raphael O'Connor.
I did.
Specifically, you thought he was a manipulator,
I
you
did.
thought he was a liar,
Yes.
you think he's a sociopath.
Yes.
In fact, not only do you think all those things, you think he's a monster.
Yes.
In fact, you think he's so manipulative that he's trying to manipulate this trial, don't you?
I do.
You think specifically that he had a secret meeting with Alex Franklin where they invented the Stockholm Syndrome defense, right?
Yes.
Then you don't have any evidence that this secret meeting actually took place, right?
No.
But in fairness to you, you think that there's a substantial possibility that he would try and pull something so shady because of how manipulative he is.
That's right.
So it sounds like you think that Raphael O'Connor is a lying manipulator who no reasonable person should trust.
Yes.
No further questions?
Redirect?
Yes, Your Honor. One moment, Your Honor, I'm sorry. Detective Lewin, you had previously come to the conclusion that there is no evidence to show that the defendant actually had Stockholm Syndrome. Why is that?
Could you repeat? I'm sorry. Could you repeat the question? I'm sorry.
You had previously on direct come to the conclusion that there is no evidence to show that the defendant had actually suffered Stockholm Syndrome. Why?
This is because after you look at all of the different elements, you will find that Mr. O'Connor was not the abuser of Miss Franklin, and that she was able to leave the compound whenever she was able to leave the compound.
So Tom made 2 points that you have to answer at least. And one of them is, it says, all right, your position that he's not the abuser, well, that's bogus.
Yeah.
Because he was the abuser by proxy. What do you have to say about that? You have to say something about that or he's going to win the trial.
Yeah. What do I have to say about that?
You can say nothing about that. I'm fine with winning.
Seriously, you have to have a comeback for
Yeah.
that.
So you
And you don't have to have it right now and invent it on the spot. I want you to make a note.
Mhm.
You need a comeback for that, and you have to memorize it, and you're gonna say something like, so now on cross-examination, Mr. Tom over here made a big point about how he directed the father to do this. What do you have to say about that? Well, that's a redirect, is that open like that? That's the way you do it. But you have to have that answer.
Okay.
Okay, and what was the other one now? Because I got lost.
That inability to escape.
Yeah, okay,
She had no life skills. That was the
No life skills,
Yeah, she
yeah.
had no life skills, and that created the inability to escape.
Okay, well, and actually the big one I was thinking of is that your first witness is a big liar that no one should believe. I mean, can you imagine the closing on that now? All right, first witness. Let's talk about their first witness. Doesn't take long, does it? Big liar, nothing to believe. Even their second witness said he don't believe the first witness. So let's talk about the second witness. So, so we got to, how do you answer that? Why is it? And has to be your answer, and you've got to help her invent it, though. Why is it that we should believe him this time?
Which I don't know if you remember how familiar you are with this, but you also do talk about the fact that Franklin is also a monster and Franklin is also incredibly manipulative, but I don't know how to reframe that into a non-leading question.
Is there anyone else we should address?
All right, so you said he's manipulative and a liar, right? Why should we trust him here? Your answer, the beginning of your answer then is, well, everybody in that bunch was manipulative and a liar. That's the thing. That's what marks that type
That's
of a
like
group.
the standard for this case now.
Right. That's what marks that type of a group. But the reason he's telling the truth now is what? I mean, I don't know. I don't
His
have an
life is
answer
on
for you.
line.
Come up with one before the next trial.
Yeah.
Or just redirect it.
Okay.
That she just redirects it, and that just shows just how much everybody knew what they were doing when it happened.
Okay.
Okay, so but that's the way redirect works, is you think, what did he just score on you, and how do I respond to it? Now, the thing is, you have to think of what's everybody ever going to score on you, and how do you respond to it?
Yeah.
That's the way
Yeah.
it works. That's the way trials work. You always have to think, anything anybody could throw at me, and how do I respond to it?
Okay. So opposing counsel just made the accusation that
You know his name, come on.
Attorney Wood.
Attorney Wood just made the accusation.
Yeah, my brother. I say Mr. Wood. I don't say attorney. I just say
Okay.
Mr. Wood just told you this.
That O'Connor is a manipulative monster. Did anyone or who else on the compound exhibits? I'm trying to figure out how to not lead it though. I'm really bad with leading questions.
But you don't want to say who else. Your point is not that everyone is a manipulative monster, but your point is that first off, your point has to be that that's the standard, but that's just a lead-in to what your point is. Your
Okay.
point has to be, why should we believe him now? And I don't know the answer to that.
Okay.
You got to think of one. You don't have to think of it right now, is what I'm saying. So you can sit down, we can move to the next thing. But you have to think of it before the next week.
Okay. No further
How do we
questions?
respond? You always have to think, how do I respond to whatever they're going to throw at me?
Okay.
All right, step down.
Any other witnesses?
No, Your Honor,
Any other?
prosecution.
Okay.
Your Honor, at this point, we would
You
like
can
to.
take your time and get back.
Thank you. All right, Your Honor, at this point, we'd like to submit
Asking her outside premises.
Has anybody rested yet?
The
Prosecution just did.
Oh, I didn't.
Your Honor, permission to be heard outside of the presence of the jury.
Right?
At this point, pursuant to Rule 29 of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure, we move for a directed verdict of acquittal. The prosecution.
Why?
The prosecution provided insufficient evidence with respect to the element that the defendant acted willfully, knowingly, or intentionally, which are required mental states for each of the charges against Ms. Franklin. So for that reason, we move for directed verdict of acquittal.
What does the prosecution have to say about the element of intent?
Your Honor, we have shown through the examination with Mr. O'Connor that Alex Franklin did specifically say that she wants to blow up the bank because that was where her mother died and she wanted revenge.
Okay.
Therefore, it goes
That goes to motive, and then how do we know that she intended to set off the bomb?
the exhibit 4H showing her text messages from her phone showed that she had intent to send them text messages that detonated the bomb.
And what exhibit is that in this trial?
It's exhibit 6.
What does the prosecution have, what evidence has the prosecution put forward that the crime was committed in the Northern District of New York?
It was committed in Syracuse, New York.
What testimony were we given that the crime was committed in Syracuse, New York? At some point in this trial, someone has to say that that Central Reserve Bank
Is in Syracuse.
is here.
Yeah, Syracuse.
And
That was
that's,
on me.
those are things that you guys have to listen for.
Yeah.
Because those are little things that are not the big facts of the cases, which people will forget to do.
But if we know them, we win. You know, practically speaking. Right.
But it's a much better thing to attack than intent, which they've spent so much time on.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Do you need a break before we start the defense's case or not?
We're fine with proceeding now. If the prosecution wants a 5-minute break, we don't object to that, but.
If you guys don't need one, then I'll be good, I can chug along.
Yeah, we'll just keep going.
All right. Defense can call their first witness.
In that case, Your Honor, defense calls Dr. Leslie Pander to the stand.
Pander?
Yes.
Oh, good name, huh? Would have thought better of Joanne.
Oh, Jesus, this is low.
Yeah, I know.
Good afternoon. Could you please state your name for the jury?
Yes, my name is Leslie Pander.
Ms. Pander, what do you do for work?
I am a psychiatrist who works at St. Joseph's Hospital, and I also have my own private practice.
Dr. Pander, I want to talk to you about what it took for you to ultimately work at St. Joseph's Hospital and achieve a private practice. Where did you go to school?
I went to Purdue University, or that's where I started and got my bachelor's in psychology. I went on to get my two masters, one in psychology and the other in psychopharmacology, and then I went on to get my PhD in psychiatry.
After you got your PhD in psychiatry, what did you do after that?
After that, I worked for the FBI for 15 years.
What did you do for the FBI?
I worked with a special unit that analyzed the psychological profile of violent persons.
How long were you with the FBI?
I worked with the FBI for 15 years.
Are you currently employed there now?
No.
So after your 15th year there, what did you do employment-wise after that?
After I left the FBI, I moved up to Syracuse, New York, where I established my own private practice and started working at St. Joseph's Hospital.
Okay. While you were a member of private practice in St. Joseph's Hospital, have you ever encountered the defendant before, Alex Franklin?
Yes.
How did you encounter her?
I first encountered her in 2015 after she attempted suicide. She was brought to St. Joseph's Hospital.
Had you encountered her at any other period of time after that?
Yes, she became a regular, well, not super regular, but she came to the hospital on other occasions showing a lot of physical injuries.
Dr. Pander, why are you here in court today?
I reached out to help with the case after I saw that Alex had been arrested.
Now, did you prepare a report in today's case?
Yes.
What materials did you review in preparing this report?
I reviewed the materials included in the records, the different pieces of evidence, as well as different treatises on Stockholm Syndrome.
So, on this topic of Stockholm Syndrome, because we heard Special Agent Lewin discuss this, what principles or methods did you apply in determining Stockholm Syndrome in this case?
There are different methods, but one is a sort of scale where you evaluate different facts to determine if a victim is exhibiting Stockholm Syndrome.
So, you say it's like a scale. I mean, how reliable is this scale?
This scale is held to be the golden standard within the practice.
Now, to better explain Stockholm Syndrome, I'd like to have you write some things on a whiteboard to kind of explain to the jury the details of Stockholm Syndrome. Your Honor, I ask the witness be allowed to step down to use a whiteboard for demonstrative purposes.
All right.
Oh, there it is.
Here you go. So, Dr. Pander, I want to start by describing the condition of Stockholm Syndrome to the jury. What is Stockholm Syndrome?
Can I start writing on the board?
Sure, if you could write Stockholm Syndrome at the top so we know how to spell it properly. Let the record reflect the witness has written the word Stockholm Syndrome on the top of the whiteboard. Now, Dr. Panda, what is Stockholm Syndrome?
Stockholm Syndrome is a psychological phenomenon where the victim loves and feels very close to their abuser, but it also has an effect where the victim doesn't really act of their own free will. They don't have control over their thoughts.
Now, we heard earlier from Special Agent Lewin that there are 4 criteria that are necessary to be met in order for Stockholm Syndrome to exist. What are those 4 criteria?
So, do you want me to do it?
Yes, in the new order would be great.
So the first one is that there are, the victim is isolated. First one is that there is isolation. The second one is that there is no escape. Third is that there are threats of abuse. Lastly, there are acts of kindness.
Let the record reflect that in numerical order, the witness has written on the whiteboard: isolation, no escape, threats of abuse, and acts of kindness. So, Dr. Pander, I want to take these one at a time and discuss the reasons why you believe these factors were met, starting with isolation. We heard from Special Agent Lewin that he does not concede this element. So could you briefly discuss why the isolation factor was met in this case?
Yes, the isolation factor was met because the victim wasn't able, or the victim was just kept on the compound from the age of 13 through 19. She didn't have a lot of exposure to the outside world. She didn't have a lot of friends. She just lived her whole life on the compound until she was 18.
I want to talk to you, so if you could write a brief summary on the right side of the board explaining why the isolation factor is met.
I wrote that she only lived on the compound.
Okay, now I want to talk to you about the second factor that's required to show Stockholm Syndrome, an inability to escape. This factor is contested by Special Agent Lewin. So why are you right and why is she wrong?
So there was no escape because even though there were cars, the victim or the defendant didn't know how to operate outside of the compound.
Why?
She was brought there when she was 13. She didn't have any concept of money. She didn't understand how to go get a job. She didn't understand how to live on her own without any of the help from the compound. So even though there were cars, she couldn't just get up and walk out. She didn't know how to operate off the compound.
So if you could write on the right side of the board, just like you did with isolation, a summary of the reasons why the no escape factor is met here.
I'm gonna write, she effectively had no life skills.
Okay.
Do you have a driver's license?
Oh, that's a good question.
In the record?
I don't think there's.
There's nothing in the
Nothing.
Not in the record?
They taught her how to drive though. Didn't O'Connor?
No, don't have to,
Yeah.
don't
We can do on it
don't
later.
let me distract you, it was just a
We'll
quick
put a cap on it. So I want to talk to you about that third factor, the threats and abuse. Now, we heard earlier 2 things. We heard that Ray Franklin was abusive to Alex Franklin, but we heard from Special Agent Lewin that Raphael O'Connor wasn't personally putting his hands on her. So why was this factor, threats or abuse, met in this case?
So even though Mr. O'Connor didn't put his hands on her, he helped effectuate someone beating her.
How?
O'Connor understood that Ray Franklin would beat the defendant if Ray O'Connor, or if O'Connor was displeased by anything. And there were very subtle hints that Ray or O'Connor could give Ray, and then it would result in him beating the defendant.
So in this case, was the threat or abuse factor met based on O'Connor's involvement
in Alex Franklin's abuse.
Yes.
If you could write on the right side of the board, just like before, the short summary of the reasons.
I'm gonna write that Ray Franklin was actually the weapon.
Okay.
Or he was helped.
Now, finally, Dr. Pander, and let the record reflect that the witness wrote on the board, Ray Franklin equals weapon. Now, I want to talk to you about that fourth factor, acts of kindness that are shown by a captor to a victim. In this case, were acts of kindness shown to Alex Franklin?
Yes.
Why?
Because Alex Franklin, for example, had a phone. This was something that wasn't allowed for anybody else on the compound, yet it was given to her specifically by O'Connor.
What other acts of kindness did Raphael O'Connor show to Alex Franklin during her time in the compound?
Another one could be that, he helped save her from abuse, and whenever she went to the hospital, he would stay with her. Just little things that would make it seem as if he was trying to take care of her.
So why is this factor, acts of kindness to a victim, why is that important in the analysis of Stockholm Syndrome?
It's an important factor because it's part of the whole cycle of showing that there is abuse. And for somebody who is a victim of Stockholm Syndrome, the moments when they receive kindness are the moments when they feel like they're being loved. And it helps foster that affection back towards their abuser.
Based on the evidence you reviewed, did Alex Franklin feel like she was being loved by Raphael O'Connor?
Yes.
Why?
Because he kept treating her with kindness in moments when she was extremely vulnerable, and also it fit into the context of all these other factors.
And if you could write on the right side of the board, just like before, a summary of what we talked about.
I'm just going to write that O'Connor was kind.
Sure. Okay, you can be seated, Dr. Pander. Your Honor, I ask that the whiteboard be preserved for closing arguments. So, Dr. Pander, I want to kind of combine all these factors that we've talked about and discuss why it matters in this case. Based on your knowledge, training, and experience, were you able to form an opinion to a reasonable degree of psychological certainty as to whether Alex Franklin had Stockholm Syndrome?
Yes.
What was that opinion?
In my professional opinion, I found that the defendant did suffer from Stockholm Syndrome.
Now, what exactly does it mean for someone psychologically when they have Stockholm Syndrome?
Psychologically, it means that they don't have a clear understanding between what is right and what is wrong.
No further questions?
Cross-examination?
Dr. Bender, you, as you had just said, you said that the defendant does have Stockholm Syndrome, correct?
Yes.
And you justified the need to show all four things in this condition, correct?
Yes.
And if a single factor isn't met, then she doesn't have Stockholm Syndrome, correct?
Yes.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I just completely forgot. The defendant did in fact go to a college campus, correct?
Yes.
With other people on it, correct?
Yep.
And she did have a phone, correct?
Yes.
With the capability of putting other numbers in it, correct?
Capability, but that doesn't mean that she actually could use it.
But it had the capability to put other numbers in it, correct?
It had the capability.
And in order to plan this bombing, she had to go to a bank, correct?
Yep.
She had to open an account, correct?
I don't recall knowing who opened the account or who told her to open an account, but she had an account.
She had an account open in her name, correct?
Yes.
In order to open this account, she would have had to speak to somebody in order to open it, correct?
Yes.
There are other people at this bank, correct?
Yep.
So there is someone at this bank that she could have spoken to and warned about her situation, correct?
call speculation.
What do you have to say about that?
I don't remember. It's like the reasonable inference that there are there were other people at the opening of this bank in order for her to.
So do you really need to defend that objection? Do you even really care? That was your ultimate, the jury already gets that, right? That's your ultimate. And he objected to it. I would have said, oh, that's okay. I'm sure they know already. Move on.
Okay.
Well, okay,
Oh, that's
so
smart.
I'm not
That's
sure.
really good.
So what I'll say is, I'm not sure how many of your competition judges will be comfortable with that response
Oh,
to it. But you can certainly say, I mean, because it's speculation, well, the witness can testify if she knows.
Okay.
And then, you know, she will probably say, well, I don't know that, and you've already, just like Professor Wilson said, you've already made your point, so you don't really care if she
Okay.
acknowledges or doesn't acknowledge it. But you may be safer addressing the objection at least a little bit.
Now, you said yourself that the defendant presents an unconditional example of Stockholm syndrome, correct?
Yes.
And in fact, that Alex should have attached her fear to her father, correct?
In a traditional diagnosis, yes, but as I said, this was unusual.
Because he was the one who threatened her, correct?
Yes.
And now you've been wrong about Alex before in your life, correct?
I'm not sure I understand what you mean.
You said in your expert report that you should have had Child Protective Services look into Alex's case, correct?
Yes.
And you didn't.
Yes.
Now, you said in your expert report that's because she is an incredibly convincing liar, correct?
Yes.
No further questions, Your Honor.
No redirect, or just ask the witness to be allowed to step down.
Thanks for calling that.
Could you please state your name and spell your last name for the court?
Alex Franklin, Franklin.
Ms. Franklin, why are we here today?
I have been accused of bombing the Central Reserve Bank in Syracuse, New York.
Did you?
Yes.
And why is that?
I did not know what I was doing at the time. I thought that it was what Mr. O'Connor wanted me to do.
What, if any, diagnosis did Dr. Pander give you?
She diagnosed me with Stockholm Syndrome.
Now, Dr. Pander just testified that there are 4 different elements for meeting Stockholm Syndrome, so I'm going to walk you through what happened to you and kind of talk about these different elements. So first I'm going to talk to you about isolation. All right. Okay, so Ms. Franklin, Mr. O'Connor stated that he gave you a cell phone. What can you tell me about that cell phone?
Well, he gave it to me. We weren't allowed to have like possessions of any kind really on the compound, and he gave it to me for the specific purpose of like talking to him.
So there were restrictions on the phone? So what were the restrictions on the phone?
Was it ever stated that there? I don't.
Yeah.
It was for the purpose of talking to him. I don't know. I don't recall ever getting any other restrictions.
Your Honor, at this point, I would like to approach the witness with exhibits 4A through 4D. They've been stipulated as authentic.
Okay. Objection?
No objections.
What are the trial exhibit? What are we on, 8 or 9?
We are on 8. Are they being admitted collectively, like as one bundle?
Yes, Your Honor, would you like me to establish the foundations or just?
No, I just need to know what number we're calling.
Trial exhibit 8.
Trial exhibit 8. Okay. Ms. Franklin, could you look at these? What are they?
These are text messages between myself and Mr. O'Connor.
Are they a fair and accurate representation of?
Ray stipulated them authentic, they're already in evidence, we don't need to do that.
Oh, okay. Now, may I publish to the jury?
No,
Okay, all right.
There's no good practice.
So, Ms. Franklin, in the first exhibit, Exhibit 4A, you asked Mr. O'Connor if you could go
It's
to.
not 4A anymore.
Oh, trial exhibit.
Exhibit
Okay, so for the for trial exhibit 8, the first page, you asked him if you could go to a class on American politics and socialism. What did he respond with?
He said, no, there's work to be done at the compound.
And then you pleaded with him to go, and what did he say?
No, the covenant comes first.
Okay. Now, may I direct your attention to the second text message? Mr. O'Connor said that he stopped by to surprise you with lunch, and instead of studying at the library, he found you having drinks at a cafe with some skanky material obsessed bimbo. And what did you say?
I said, calm down, Ralphie. I literally just wanted to get coffee with them.
And then he stated he was upset. And what was his final response?
He said that if that's the life I want, then leave the covenant. He gave me everything I have, and he can take it back. Is that what I want?
All right. Now, Ms. Franklin, move your attention to the third page. You stated that you wanted that you need to go to study after class with the group, and you asked if you could stay on campus until 6 or 7. What did he say?
No.
He didn't elaborate. Why didn't he elaborate in the same way that he did in the first 2 pages?
Because I already knew the why.
And what was their answer?
Because the covenant comes first.
Okay. All right. One second. All right. You stated earlier that you attended university. Did you like it there?
I did. It was hard to make friends though.
And why was that?
Well, I couldn't really make any friends. I couldn't really talk to anybody else because Mr. O'Connor wouldn't want me to. I would have to go right back to the covenant and work, and I didn't really have time.
Was there another reason why?
I was afraid that if it upset Mr. O'Connor, then my father would hit me.
Okay. Now, Ms. Franklin, I want to talk to you about your inability to escape. How old were you when you joined the compound?
I think like 13 or 14.
And what were some of the conditions to join the compound?
We had to give up all of our stuff.
Since you were a child, you probably didn't have much. Did your father follow the rules?
Yep, we gave up everything.
Was there any way to leave the compound?
There were like cars on the compound that you could check out.
But if you chose to leave the compound, could you take those cars with you?
You had to sign them out, yes.
Okay. So if you left the compound, what would you have?
So why didn't you leave?
Oh, okay.
That's the way you do that.
All right.
If you left, what would you have is speculative.
Okay.
But just, what you're trying to get at is, why didn't she leave the compound? Just ask her that. That's what I'm interested in. I'm the jury.
So why didn't you leave the compound?
I didn't have anything but the clothes on my back. I didn't know what I could do or where I could go.
Couldn't you get a job? Couldn't you rent a place? Answer
I
no,
didn't,
of course
yes.
not. And you know you can't, right?
Yeah.
I mean, put yourself in that
Yeah.
in that mental position.
Mm-hmm.
right? No, I really I have no idea what jobs even are,
Yeah.
or how to get a job, or how it works. Rent a place? I don't know how to do that. I've always had a place. This is you. You have to get into that mindset, and you just have to ask her questions and let her be her.
Okay.
That's the way examination. You will win this case if the jury likes her. That's the way this case is going to be. It's almost every case is that way. Almost every case is if the jury likes your client or the other guy better. That's all it is.
Okay.
So I want to know everything about you and why you are in this awful predicament.
Okay.
Do you feel like you would be able to sustain a life outside of the compound?
Objection calls speculation. Answer she knows.
I don't think I would be able to. I was homeschooled on the compound. I don't really have much of a concept of what it would be like to not live on the compound. I mean, other than chores, I've never really held a real job. I don't own any of my own things aside from the clothes on my back. So no, I don't think I would be able to live off the compound.
What did Mr. O'Connor tell you if you ever tried to leave the compound?
That I would end up like my mother.
And where is your mother?
She is dead.
Ms. Franklin, I want to direct your attention to the abuse that you suffered while living on the compound. Do you have a family, Ms. Franklin?
I did. I had a mother who died she was a hostage in a bank robbery, and she was shot when the manager wouldn't open the vault and give the robbers what they wanted. And my father was just killed in the raid of the compound.
What can you tell me about your father?
He was abusive. He was awful. He would beat me whenever I did something that he didn't like, or whenever I expressed views that were contrary to him or to the compound.
So let's back up a little bit.
And what's your position here with regard to the beatings, young lady? You're on trial for your life. What is your position? What's the significance of those beatings? They were done at the hands of the compound leader. Your father was simply the instrument of torture.
Okay.
That's the way. But you just told me your father beat you whenever he didn't like whatever you did. I don't want it. So remember what your position is.
Okay.
So let's step back a little bit. How did you come in contact with the compound?
So after my mother died, my father took us to these grief meetings, and eventually those grief meetings turned into covenant meetings.
Tell me about that first meeting.
Okay. That first meeting, we went there.
How old were you?
I believe I was 13, 14 at the time.
Okay, and your mom had just died. Your dad's taking you to this meeting. What was the meeting like?
I don't remember much about the content of the meeting itself, but I remember Mr. O'Connor being very charismatic, very charming. I liked talking to him. I liked hearing him talk. And then I remember my father and Mr. O'Connor had a 2-hour long conversation after the meeting. And then immediately after that, my father told me that we were going home and we were packing up all of our things and we were moving to the compound.
And how did you react?
I didn't want to go at all. And I expressed those views to him and he beat me as a result.
Okay. Ms. Franklin,
What were the things, do we know? What were the things you had to leave behind? What were the things you had to
Everything.
give up to the covenant, do we know?
Everything.
I'm just saying,
specifically?
I want you guys to start trying to think about as you're doing these examinations, thinking what makes this a human story for this witness. You know, this is her life and her story, and you want to make them think, this poor teenage girl got dragged in. She's 13. She goes nothing. She's just going from being a kid to an adult, and And the next thing you know, she's dragged into this place, has to give everything up. She's put, did they ever stick you in these isolation chambers?
Yeah.
See, I didn't even hear that when I heard the isolation piece. But anyway, but you know, so bad things happen. I want to hear all about her terrible life, and then how the only ray of hope was this leader who was like God. And he was wonderful, and I would do anything for him. And, you know, but I didn't realize what was going on, really. You know,
Right, yeah.
So actually, we probably, and I don't know if you have pieces you want to finish, but the whole examination, there's a structure to it direct that you haven't used, and you need to redo your examination with the structure. The structure is first. The first thing is we're going to introduce her, tell a little bit about who she is and so forth, but then most importantly, we're going to get her story. We want to hear what happened to her. What's your life been like? What happened? And in that story, we're going to hear a lot of these important things, but we're not going to stress them until we get to our points, which is you were under his, you know, tell me about the duress.
Okay.
And then we get the important points, important evidence out. That's the way we're told. But I want to hear her story first so that by the time you even start into your points, I already feel so sorry for her and feel like she's been screwed here. And the government is just, you know, adding insult to injury. That's the way, that's the story piece of it.
Okay.
So if you have pieces you want to finish, you should do that. But otherwise, I think you got to rewrite
Okay. All right.
with that organizational structure.
Um.
So finish what you were going to do.
All right. Your father, the first one. Okay. From that point further, did your father abuse you?
Yes, on several different occasions.
Beyond the fact that a child should never be abused in the way that you were, what were the circumstances behind that abuse?
There was one instance where my father had found the phone that Mr. O'Connor, had given me, and he,
no, it's fine. Just the general, like, what was generally the circumstances behind the abuse? Like, every time that your father abused you, what were the reasons why?
it was because I would often share my not disbelief is not the word that I'm looking for. I would have something to say that would be taken as contrary to the covenant's beliefs.
So okay, so so here's how you might want to ask that series of questions.
Okay.
Okay. So when you went into this place, was there any parts about it that you didn't agree with? You went into this covenant?
Yes, but
Well, these are the things you just told me you expressed them to your father. That's what you just said a minute ago. That's why I
only
asked
in the
that.
very beginning of her affidavit does it say that she said I don't want to go, but then that's it. They don't really.
Well, no, I'm trying to get the abuse questions in a different way.
Mhm.
I want a question that elicits from you. I sometimes would disagree with things about the covenant.
Mhm.
And then I'm going to say, well, what happened then? And you're going to say, well, Raphael would tell my father
Mhm.
to take care of it. And what would your father do? He would beat me.
Mhm.
I don't want to hear abuse. I want to hear beat.
Okay.
I mean, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about getting beat.
Mhm.
Abuse is a broader term, and it's kind of vague, you know. But you found the idea is I want her to tell her story in a way rather than you're giving the punchline and then having her fill in the details.
Mhm.
So, did you ever get beat? Yeah. How come? Well, this other stuff happened.
Okay.
So I want you to say, well, do you ever disagree? Yeah. What happened? Oh, Raphael, remember, he's the bad guy.
Okay.
Told my father, beat me.
Mhm.
And what happened then? My father beat me. See, that's the order it should be coming out. And rather than, did you ever get beat? Yeah. How come I disagreed with stuff? And then I didn't even hear Raphael.
Who established the rules of the covenant?
Mr. O'Connor.
Was there any point when Mr. O'Connor viewed your abuse or viewed beating?
Yes, there was this one instance. I was feeling very alone and very isolated. And so I had attempted suicide, and he took me to the hospital. And when I came home with a prescription for antidepressants.
And what did Mr. O'Connor do?
He ripped up that prescription. And he said something along the lines of how the medical industry feeds into the corporate machine.
How did you respond?
I yelled at him, and I said that like I needed that medication, I needed help, and he just ripped it up.
And what did your father do?
He slapped me.
Did Mr. O'Connor do anything?
He told my father to pick me up and slap me again.
Now, Ms. Franklin, we're going to talk about how
Good, I like that. That was a good job you just did.
that last one. Okay. Now, Ms. Franklin, I want to focus on the acts of kindness that Mr. O'Connor showed you.
Mm-hmm.
What were some of those acts?
Well, he gave me a phone, and phones and like other personal possessions weren't allowed on the compound. And when I started going to college, he both paid for my tuition and drove me to and from school every day.
Was there a point where your relationship changed?
Yes, there was. The night that my father found the phone that Mr. O'Connor gave me.
Now, Ms. Franklin, I'm going to walk you through the events of that night.
Okay.
Where were you?
I was at home.
And who was with you?
My father.
What was he doing?
He had found the phone and he was yelling at me, and yeah.
So what did you do?
I grabbed the phone from him and I ran up to my room and texted Mr. O'Connor to come help me.
Did he come right away?
Nope.
Where was your father?
He had started to like break down the door of my room, and he had come in and he started to beat on me.
Did you defend yourself?
Barely. I was able to like ward off a couple blows, but he had started to beat me to the point where one of the blows hit my arm and I felt a crack and like a rush of pain in my arm, and I was convinced I was going to die that night.
Did you hear anything?
I heard a crash.
What did you see?
I saw my father fall to the floor, and then I looked up and I saw Mr. O'Connor standing there.
All right, nothing further.
Nothing further?
So because the things are restructured, I restructured it, so I'm kind of, do you
What did she think when he was
Oh,
standing?
okay, yes, yeah. So as he was standing over you, what were you thinking?
I was thinking that I had been saved.
What did she do? What, you know?
Okay, so what happened, so what did you do after this?
Mr. O'Connor had picked me up and brought me to the hospital, and he had told me that I would be safe as long as I stayed with him and stayed on the compound. And he told me I could never say no again, and that I would stay safe as long as I stayed with him, and I never said no, I never questioned.
Well, that would have been good if you'd practiced it a little.
Yeah.
Yeah.
She stayed with him. She then lived with O'Connor instead of the father. They started sleeping together. I mean, there's some stuff that goes on
Yeah.
that, we had practiced last week that's all within this one self-contained section.
Right.
Regardless of the reorganization.
Right.
All right.
Yeah, and that's the section, and then you have to end up, always with the defendant, the ending is the denials.
Okay, all right.
All right, you wanna do it? You know your denials, you know what I mean? I said, so on that day, did did you do this? Well, in this case, it's yes, you
Yes.
did do
Yes,
it,
you
but,
did, yeah.
but what you're gonna say is, in this case, the denial would have to be, so when you did this, why did you do it? I did it
Okay.
because Raphael made me do it. I really didn't have a choice.
I would have done anything for him.
So I started off with that in the beginning. Do I repeat or do
No,
I just
because
move
what you
that
start
to
with
the
the
end?
beginning is that you ask if she did it, right? She
Right.
says yes, and then we go into all of the background for that.
Okay.
Here is essentially the did you mean to do it question.
Okay.
And then she'll say, but you don't ask did you mean to do it, you
Right.
ask,
Yes.
you know. But
Why?
her answer to the did you mean to do it is no, I just did whatever I wanted to make him happy. So I would do anything to make him happy, and what he wanted to do was tear down the capitalist system starting with the bank.
Okay.
Right?
Yes.
And so
Yeah.
I helped him blow it up.
Okay. So Miss Franklin, did you commit this crime?
Yes,
And why did you do that?
because I would do anything at that point to make Mr. O'Connor happy, and I thought that blowing up that bank would make him happy.
I mean, well, you gotta work.
Is
on
there
it.
a right from wrong knowledge thing here? What is I mean, I took a quick look and I don't know if we have standards for jury instructions for what we have to prove here with regard to our insanity
The
defense.
jury instructions in the back of the packet, in the affirmative defense section, talks about, I think it was an inability to tell the difference between right and wrong, is my
Or
understanding.
control conduct, those are the usual two things, but this one I thought was even vaguer. Then they talked about she couldn't form the intent. Is that because of her
Affirmative
insanity?
defense is on page 41. When a defendant is charged with a crime,
Hold on, it's further down. So, has a mental disease or defect that rendered the defendant incapable of appreciating the quality and nature of what the defendant was doing at the time.
Did you understand what you were doing? Well, not really, I just was doing whatever he wanted me to do. Something like that, but you have
Yeah,
to try to
right,
track the
like that.
language of that
Okay.
of the instruction right there is what you want to do with that last question. The denials are always, I didn't do it, or here's my defense.
Okay.
That's really what it is. Okay. All right?
All right.
Good.
Nothing further.
Cross-examination?
yes, Your Honor. Ms. Franklin, you knew about this attack
Yes,
because you actually helped to keep it secret.
yes,
You even texted O'Connor when people were snooping around.
yes.
Already entered.
Sorry, entered?
It's,
O'Connor, I'd like to turn, or Ms. Franklin, I'd like to turn your attention to Exhibit 4H, which you have up there with you. What does it say again?
you told me to let you know if Chris keeps asking questions.
And you also wrote something with a smiley face, didn't you?
I did.
What did you write?
Smiley face with 7 exclamation points, if I can count correctly.
That's right, you wrote, well, Chris just approached me and asked about CRB, smiley face, equal sign, parentheses, and then 7 exclamation points, correct?
Correct.
You also sent another text, didn't you, with that type of smiley face? If you pull up, I think we've got 4K up here.
I don't think so. Okay, table.
Where's 4K?
Counsel, would you like a copy?
Yes, please. This is a text message that was sent from your phone, correct?
Correct.
And this was sent on the day of the bombing, May 23rd,
Correct.
at
3:49 in the morning?
Yes, correct.
Your Honor, I'd like to admit Exhibit 4K, which has been stipulated authentic as a text message from the defendant's phone.
Isn't this already in evidence?
Your Honor, my understanding, it's already been entered
It's already
in the directed Alex, Raphael O'Connor.
Oh, yep, it is already in. In this text message, there's another smiley face, isn't there?
Yes,
And it's also another smiley face that says equal sign parentheses, right?
yes,
And that's the exact same type of smiley face that was in your text message to Chris, wasn't it? Or
yes,
about Chris.
yes,
Yes. Now, when you sent this text message on the morning of May 23rd, you did it for a reason. It was because you wanted revenge for your mother's death. In fact, you had been so tormented by your mother's death.
Counsel, you gotta get an answer from the witness.
Okay.
no, I did it because, Mr. O'Connor would have wanted me to do it.
But that's not why you chose May 23rd as the day to blow up the Central Reserve Bank, was it?
No,
It was because that was the anniversary of your mother's death.
no, it wasn't. July, right?
Ms. Franklin, Mr. O'Connor never forced you to do anything, did he?
I mean, not technically, no.
Not technically, no. In fact, it was Ray, your father, who kept you to that grueling work schedule every day, wasn't it?
Yes, but
And you learned very quickly that Ray was going to hurt you if you complained about anything.
yes, but
And it was Ray who ordered you to fast.
yes,
And it was Ray who took food away from you.
yes,
In fact, you feared your father because you knew Ray was crazy enough to hurt or kill you.
yes,
And you sought Mr. O'Connor out instead.
yes,
You found any excuse to be with him when you were on the compound.
correct,
And you liked being with him
correct,
because it made you happy.
correct,
And you would be lying if you said if you said it didn't feel good to be devoted to him.
correct.
And Mr. O'Connor never isolated you, did he?
Not technically,
In fact, he sent you to college, right?
yes,
And he didn't go to school with you either.
correct,
He drove you there and back.
mm-hmm,
And at college, you saw other people.
correct,
You were able to talk with those people.
yes,
And so you regularly went to school and spent the entire day on campus with other people when Mr. O'Connor wasn't there.
yes,
You also had a phone.
yes,
You were special because no one else had a phone, did they?
yes,
Your phone worked, right?
mm-hmm,
You understand how to charge a phone.
yes,
You understand how to use a phone.
yes,
And you can call people on this phone.
yes.
If I had anybody to call. What's the matter with you? You wanna go to jail?
If I had anybody to call,
But wait, you were on campus all day with other people, right?
yes.
You could have talked to them.
I mean, no.
They're really different.
Yeah.
They're not part of our group. They're really different. I'm just saying, you
Yeah, I
gotta be a
know.
little careful if you wanna get in a fight with the witness can almost always win that fight. You have to stick with facts
Mhm.
in order to avoid fights. Opinions are fights. So just be a little careful.
Okay. But you could theoretically text another person on this phone.
Yes,
In fact, you texted Mr. O'Connor a lot,
I did.
and you even texted that bomb that one time.
I don't remember doing that.
Oh, you don't remember anymore. Okay, let's continue. Now, you said on direct that you didn't have anything but the clothes on your back, but that's not true, is it?
I mean, I don't have any other possessions.
But before the bomb went off and you got arrested, you did have more than just the clothes on your back.
You had a bank account,
Just because I have a bank account doesn't mean I know how to use it.
but you still had that bank account in your name.
Yes.
And Mr. O'Connor gave you money to put in that bank account.
Yes, he did.
In fact, he gave you a lot of money to put in that bank account.
Yeah, he did.
Is this your financial statement for your bank account?
Yes, it is.
I believe it says that you had about $1,700 in that bank account at one point.
Yes.
So you had a working phone, you went to school on a regular basis, where you spent an entire day away from Mr. O'Connor, and you had $1,700, right?
Yes.
Reader, Chairman? Ms. Franklin, you were trying to testify as counsel was asking you different questions about your interaction with Mr. O'Connor. Would you like to explain yourself now?
Yes.
Good try, but you really ought to be more specific.
Oh,
I was gonna say, I don't
I'm trying to remember which one it
exactly what
was.
I was
I mean, that's a good attitude, good question, but you have to be more specific with what the question was that she wants to respond to.
I think it was, technically I could talk to other people.
Talk to, yeah, okay, so there were like, okay, so,
Yeah.
Ms. Franklin, opposing counsel,
That'd be Miss Farrell.
Ms. Farrell?
Yeah, use their name.
Okay, Ms. Farrell, okay. Ms. Franklin,
Mhm.
Ms. Farrell interrupted you as you were trying to discuss the reasons why you couldn't escape the compound. Would you like to explain it more now?
I would. Yes, I had a phone with the actual capability of texting other people, but I don't know other people. I went to school with other people that, yes, I could talk to while I was on campus, but they don't know me. They don't know my way of life. They wouldn't approve, I guess, of the way of life on the compound, and that's all I've known. And I know that it would upset Mr. O'Connor, or I knew it would upset Mr. O'Connor if I tried to talk to other people, if I tried to, I guess, share what was going on, and then Mr. O'Connor would just, tell my father to beat me again, and I knew what would happen if I did try to talk to anybody. Yes, I could talk to people, but not actually, so.
And Ms. Farrell also stated that, or asked you about the bombing.
Mhm.
What day did the bombing take place on?
May 23rd, 2019.
May or
It was May.
Yes.
May. Okay, and when is the anniversary of your mother's death? June.
June 23rd.
Are they the same day?
No, they are not.
And she also asked you about the bank account.
Mhm.
Would you like to elaborate on what that bank account was used for?
That bank account, when that bank account was opened, it was opened for the purpose of planning this bombing. It was opened for the purpose of, making sure that there were the funds so that Baylor Riswold and I could go out and buy the things necessary to create this bomb.
Was that money used for you personally? Or was that money being used by you for personal needs?
No.
Nothing further.
Can you ask her, was that your money? And she
Okay.
said, was that your money? And she says, no, that was compound money. If I tried to touch that, I would have been dead. Something like that.
Yeah.
The been dead part may not.
All right, not
Right.
dead.
Yeah.
If I would have touched that, if I would have tried to touch that, Raphael would have stopped me.
Was that your money in that bank account?
No, if I I would have tried to touch that money or use that money for any other purpose, I would have been stopped.
Don't be so passive. That was compound money. Raphael would have stopped me.
Okay.
I
Mr.
would have
O'Connor
been
would have stopped
stopped.
me.
Nothing further.
Okay. Witness is excused.
How do I impeach them after I've already crossed them?
You can't.
Yeah, just recross.
Well, if they say something on redirect that is not within the packet,
Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the defense has tried to convince you that the defendant, Alex Franklin, did not know what she was doing when she blew up the Central Reserve Bank in Syracuse, New York. That is all a lie. The defense has tried to convince you that Mr. O'Connor, as the mastermind of this, or was the mastermind of this plan, as the leader of this cult, that he intended on brainwashing the defendant, giving her this idea, and saying that it was because he wanted the fall of capitalism, and that he truly believed that she wanted that too. That is all a lie. The defendant wanted to blow up the Central Reserve Bank because she wanted revenge. Her mother was killed in that bank because a manager wouldn't open the vault. The defendant wanted revenge because, the defendant wanted revenge, and that is why she helped to plan, she helped to build, she helped to plant and then detonate a bomb, destroying the Central Reserve Bank. As the prosecution, we have to show you, beyond a reasonable doubt, that the defense did in fact plant this bomb, planted a weapon of mass destruction, conspired to do that, actually detonated and thus destroyed the bank, and also conspired to do that. I know that was a little weird. I know I have to get that, work on that. We did show you that the defendant was the mastermind behind this bomb. You heard in testimony that the defendant was the one, unprompted, who brought up the idea and brought up the Central Reserve Bank as the location of this bombing. We have established through expert testimony and through expert report that the defendant was the one that planted the bomb. We have her fingerprints that says that that shows that she was the one that did this. We have also shown you, through, once again, expert testimony, that the defendant has lied about her symptoms and that she has fabricated a defense or a diagnosis of Stockholm Syndrome in order to mask her guilt. We have shown you that there's only one way that you can actually be diagnosed with Stockholm Syndrome, and that is to meet all 4 required elements. We have shown you that her abuser, her quote-unquote abuser, is not her abuser at all. Because her abuser, if that were the case, would be Ray Franklin. We have shown you that she does not find Raphael O'Connor to be the person who... My mind is all scattered.
What are your points?
Right here.
Give us a roadmap. Give us a roadmap. What are the points?
I'm sorry, I need like a second. Whew, I'm all scattered. I'm all over the place. In an attempt to mask her guilt, the defendant fabricated a diagnosis of Stockholm Syndrome. We have shown you that she does not meet all 4 factors, and therefore she does not have Stockholm Syndrome. We have shown you, through expert testimony, that the person that the defense is claiming she was attached to, that the person that the defense is claiming forced her to plan and detonate this bomb was not her abuser at all. That eliminates that factor. Only one needs to be eliminated, but not only did we eliminate one factor, we now have 2. She had the ability to escape. She had cars. She had a bank account with funds in it. She had the ability to text or call anyone or talk to anyone while she was in the outside world in numerous instances while she was living on the compound. Now I'll be back up here in a moment, but before that happens, you will hear from the defense. And it is important when you listen to the defense that you remember the defendant had the understanding, had the knowledge that what she was doing was wrong, and yet she did it anyway because she wanted revenge.
Defense closing.
The prosecution just told you that Miss Franklin is a liar. Miss Franklin was abused. She was an innocent and she's a sick girl. The prosecution has to prove two things. One, that a crime was committed, and that two, Miss Franklin committed that crime. No one is disputing that a crime was committed here. But the prosecution can't prove that she committed this crime because the prosecution's witnesses are woefully inadequate. Their first witness, Mr. Raphael O'Connor, the leader of the Revolutionary Covenant cult, he is a lying, manipulative sociopath. And their other witness, FBI agent Reagan Lewin, was stuck in a porta potty at the time that the bombing occurred. So let's talk about these witnesses. Mr. Raphael O'Connor, as even described by the expert testimony of Reagan Lewin, he is a manipulative sociopath. In fact, she calls him a monster. He is only testifying here today because he got a sweetheart deal that keeps him out of jail for the rest of his life. He's not here to altruistically give you the truth of the matter. He's here because he's trying to save himself from jail. Now let's talk about Reagan Lewin. Special Agent Reagan Lewin, while she might be a great psychoanalyst, she was unable to stop the bombing. She had suspicions that things were going on, and yet she was unable to stop it from happening. She had no idea it had happened until she was driving by when the bank was in flames. Say that the facts were to even change, that Mr. O'Connor is the most truthful man you'll ever encounter, and that Reagan Lewin actually saw Franklin text the bomb. The prosecution still doesn't prove their case. And this is because, as according to the testimony of Dr. Pander, Miss Franklin has Stockholm Syndrome. Now, Stockholm Syndrome is a disorder where an individual, well, a victim, latches on to their abuser and becomes brainwashed. So I'm going to walk you through what happens to Miss Franklin so you can see that she does indeed have Stockholm Syndrome. First, Dr. Pander talked about isolation. She only lived on the compound. As Miss Franklin testified, her cell phone was only allowed to be used as communication between herself and Mr. O'Connor. That whenever she tried to meet with friends outside of the compound while she was in university, she wasn't allowed to. He would tell her no, he would get upset. Next, we'll talk about no escape. her perceived idea that she could not escape the compound. She was 13 years old when she came onto the compound. When she was there, she did manual labor and she learned general skills, but she can't apply those skills into a general world setting. She was taught in the schools that that commerce is evil and that the government is bad. Our whole community outside of the compound relies on commerce. How is she able to learn any life skills or have any life skills when she leaves the compound? So next, the threats of abuse. Now, the prosecution keeps talking about how Mr. O'Connor didn't physically abuse her. So therefore, she should not have attached herself to Mr. O'Connor. The reality, Mr. O'Connor used Ray Franklin as a weapon for his abuse. As Ms. Franklin testified, Mr. O'Connor at one point even asked Mr. Franklin to beat her again after her father beat her. The rules of the compound were set by Mr. O'Connor. And every time that Ms. Franklin ever tried to break the rules, she would be beaten, as if by the force of words by Mr. O'Connor himself. Now finally, I want to talk about the acts of kindness. Ms. Franklin told you about his cell phone, about how he paid for university, and about how he drove her to school every day. But the most important act of kindness is the night he saved her. Her father was beating on the door. He came in and he started beating her. She hears this crash, and Mr. O'Connor is on the floor next to her. Oh, sorry, her father is on the floor next to her. And standing above her is her savior, Mr. O'Connor. From that point on, as she testified, she would do anything for him. There was no breaking that bond that they had created. In a few moments, the judge is going to come before you, and he's going to tell you, he's going to show you a sheet, and you're going to have to sign that sheet and determine whether or not you think Ms. Franklin is guilty. The prosecution has the burden of proof to show you that beyond a reasonable doubt, that Ms. Franklin committed this crime willfully and intentionally. If Ms. Franklin, in your mind, you believe that she needs all of these elements and that you do believe she has Stockholm Syndrome, you will have to choose that she is not guilty by reason of insanity. And we can show you that she did. Isolation. She was isolated from the viewpoints of others on the compound, from the viewpoints of others in the outside world. She could not feasibly escape in her mind and in the minds of everyone around her. She was abused by her father by the hands of Mr. O'Connor. He showed her acts of kindness because he was her savior. And when you put these all together, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I hope you find that, and I hope you see that Ms. Franklin is not guilty. She was manipulated, and she's a sick girl, and she needs help. Thank you.
Rebuttal?
The defense has come up here and tried to convince you that the defendant, Alex Franklin, is a sick girl. Sick indeed, as you have to be to blow up a bank in the United States of America and commit a heinous and extreme act of domestic terrorism. But she is not sick in the way that the defense claims she is sick. The defense claims that she has been manipulated in attempting to meet all these factors, and claims that she has been lied to, she has been twisted around Mr. O'Connor's finger to commit this act against the Central Reserve Bank. However, you have heard from the defense's own expert, Dr. Pander, that the defendant is a master liar, that she herself is a master manipulator. Now, I feel today as though, I can't say that, I know. The defendant today has also succeeded in manipulating you, the jury, to saying that she meets all of these elements, and therefore, when she bombed this bank, she should not be found guilty. That is not true. She was not isolated. Yes, she only lived on the compound. She had ways to get off the compound. She had a car. Meets both of these. She could escape, and she was not isolated because every time she stepped out of the compound, she was able to talk to other people. She had a phone with the ability to communicate with others. She had to speak to others throughout daily life when she was not on this compound. Threat of abuse. We've already established that Ray Franklin was her abuser, not Raphael O'Connor. You have heard expert testimony that says that she had to have or should have connected with Ray Franklin as her abuser and not Raphael O'Connor. She has manipulated you into believing that in this, this unusual form of Stockholm Syndrome, an already rare and unrecognized disease by the American Psychiatric Association, that she committed this heinous act because she was under the undue influence of Mr. O'Connor. She has not been manipulated, she is the manipulator. Do not allow her to manipulate you and to lie to you, the jury, into claiming that she is innocent or into claiming that she did this by way of insanity, because she did not. What she did is performed an act of terrorism against these United States. Do not allow her to get away with this. Which is why that we ask you today to find the defendant guilty on all charges.